This podcast contains detailed plot spoilers, adult language, and mature themes. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to a podcast of Rare Antiquities, Episode 10. On this milestone episode, and in preparation for Star Wars The Force Awakens, we will discuss and analyze the Star Wars Original Trilogy for today's show. So delay that trip to your local Tashi station, grab some blue milk, and strap yourselves in, because this is where the fun begins.
This will be a day long remembered.
I'm your host, Harry.
You just watch yourself. I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
I am your co-host, Geoff.
You're a feisty little one, but you'll soon learn some respect.
And for today's show, we also welcome back our Bothan spies, Nathan and Andrew. Glad to see you both survived, and welcome aboard.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for having me.
You got a lot of guts coming here after what you pulled.
Yeah, this should be a good one. I think we've been looking forward to doing this episode for a while. You know, obviously stepping outside of what the show's normally about, but this is too big to not talk about. And we're going to talk about one Star Wars movie. We got to talk about them all. So
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, so just as per normal, like we did reminisce a little bit about our memories. I mean, when we talk about the formation of our childhood memories, Star Wars is definitely a big part of it. I'm sure all of you guys are in the same boat. Jeff and I kind of talked a lot about this in our first ever podcast. So I know, Andrew, you briefly touched upon this when you were with us last time, but how about you two, if you can tell us a little bit more about your first memories of Star Wars and the rest of the original trilogy? Again, just brief high-level thoughts there.
I think the original trilogy are some of the earliest movies that I remember watching between Star Wars and I think Indiana Jones. I mean, those are the movies I remember as a small child watching, and even very vague recollection of seeing them in the theaters as well. I don't think I recall ever seeing any other movie in the theaters other than, yeah. And I mean, it's probably sort of shaped how I look at movies ever since.
Andrew, how about yourself?
Yeah, I was actually a late bloomer to Star Wars in the grand scheme of things, being the first time I watched the trilogy, if I remember correctly, was around, about to say middle school, but junior high. And I remember hearing about it a bunch from friends because I was always like a Star Trek fanatic. And then my parents got me the trilogy on VHS. Thankfully, the non-modified George Lucas versions of the movies. And I remember it was Christmas Day. Since we hadn't watched them, I watched all three back to back. And from that point on, I have been thoroughly hooked and kind of regretting the fact that I didn't watch it earlier, but I just have loved everything associated with Star Wars since.
So did you actually have opportunities to watch it before then, and then just by chance you watched all three? How did that kind of work out?
No, I hadn't really seen them at all. I hadn't watched them on TV. No one had really offered to watch them at their homes. That was the first time. And I remember sitting with my dad and my brother watching all three and going, wow, I feel like I just missed out on my childhood. But it was an amazing experience. And I just can't stop talking about them.
Yeah. So Nathan, did you see, because Geoff mentioned before in our first podcast that he went to see that double back-to-back feature of Empire and Return. I'm assuming you'd be with him during that experience. Is that correct?
I don't know why you would assume that.
Oh.
No, that's true. I mean, it's not like, to assume that would somehow assume that, we were related to each other. But like when I think of seeing the movies as a child, that's what I remember is the back-to-back feature, so I would have been, I don't know, 6 or so. I also remember probably crying outside a movie theater because my dad would not take me inside to watch Star Wars. But that's the other thing I remember.
Yeah, I remember crying when I wasn't supposed to get like a lot of toys after the fact. And every time we go to the mall, it's like my parents kept telling me I'd be causing a fuss and, actually banging my head on the ground because I wouldn't get in the mall, like in the toy store. Yeah, like I would actually get on my knees and I'd be like banging my head on the ground. Might explain a few things, but that's what they said I'd do when it came to Star Wars toys, especially around that age. More around Return of the Jedi time. I really wanted a Luke Skywalker figure, like from Return of the Jedi with the green lightsaber, and they wouldn't give it to me then. But lo and behold, I got it for my birthday, several months later, so it all turned out okay. I guess that they wouldn't let that go. That kind of nightmarish experience for them. They probably remembered he wants that one. So, yeah.
Geoff, I don't know if you remember this, but when Geoff and I were kids, our dad would take us to the mall to get haircuts, which of course, as kids, we hated. And so to sort of ease it over, he would always buy us like a Star Wars toy as sort of a reward for getting our haircuts. I don't know, Geoff, if you remember that.
I do remember that. And as a result, like we had every ghetto figure from the fucking background of Return of the Jedi and Jabba's palace, like every shitty toy that
like
nobody wanted.
All the clowns on the barge, on the sail barge. We
but
had all of those.
Those are the cool guys. Those are awesome.
Oh, Harry, what are you doing?
Like the packaging is like lightsaber victim number 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
Those are still the ones that I still have around. I don't have any of the cool figures, but I do have that Gamorrean.
The Gamorrean guard?
And Squid Face. Yeah.
That world building is part of what makes Star Wars so great, and what made it so great, what still makes it so great. But before we start getting into the movies, I just wanted to ask you if you guys can maybe put a little bit more verbiage to this, if you can briefly describe what Star Wars means to you. It doesn't have to be with respect to your childhood or it's a nice childhood memory. I think we're all Star Wars fans here, more or less to varying degrees. But, what does Star Wars represent to you as a film, as a franchise, these characters? What do you take away from these movies? Andrew, you go first.
Well, that's me. I was going to wait for everyone else. That's exactly what I think as well.
I figured you'd say that, so that's why I went to you first.
Son of a nutcracker. Well, for me, I think the appreciation for Star Wars really has built over the years, and just rewatching the trilogies over the last couple of years, especially as I've been getting more and more into movies. I think Star Wars, and someone recently said it best, we're saying it's like Star Wars is its own genre. It's not science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's just something unique. And with Star Wars, it really is, I think, a perfect example in movies of being able to draw the audience in based upon character development. You take a look at a movie like The Empire Strikes Back, and that was a movie that I didn't appreciate as much when I was younger, but only recently, it's just, I always thought, and we can talk about this later, Return of the Jedi was the best when I was a kid. I'm like, oh no, that's not the case. But it is an amazing way to tell a story that draws the audience in, sympathetic characters. It is storytelling at its best. And you add that science fiction and that fantasy element to it, and it's a franchise that spans generations and a story that can be told over and over and over again and never get tired of it. So for me, I think it's entertainment at its best. That's one way to describe it.
Well, very well thought out. How about Geoff? We just jump to you. How about you go ahead and give us your take?
Man, that's a really big question. What does it mean to me? I mean, I almost can't put words to that. I mean, it's pretty important to me. I mean, it's more than any other piece of entertainment. I think it's always captured my imagination. It's a world that you kind of want to be able to live in, right? I'd love to be able to live in that universe. It's so imaginative. Oh man, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, you watch them and you feel like you're in that universe, and there's so much excitement, there's so much enjoyment, and it bleeds off of the screen. Like after it's over, it stays with you. You talked about the marketing and all the 9 zillion action figures and stuff, but all of that stuff, even all that peripheral Star Wars stuff outside of the movies, keeps bringing you back into it, right? And when it's done well, and sometimes it is done very well, it's a great compliment. So, I don't think that even scratches the surface, but maybe I'll be able to answer that question better after we kind of get into the episode a little bit.
Sure. No, sounds good. So Nathan, just again, high level thoughts. What do these movies represent to you? What did you take away anything from these movies at all?
Well, they certainly represent that I've spent a lot of money over the last 40 years. Not just buying movies on every new media that comes out, but toys, video games. I've certainly read a number of the expanded universe books and stuff, but also they kind of represent a benchmark for the types of movies. And I think it's a genre onto itself, but anytime you have trilogies or big action movies and stuff like that, Star Wars becomes the benchmark for how you develop story, how you develop characters, and all the pieces fit together in a trilogy. That's like the most concise way I can put it.
I agree with you. I think, as a couple of you guys already mentioned, it's not exactly just a fantasy. It's not science fiction. It's somewhere in between. I put it as more like this. It's a modern fairy tale. And what George Lucas did is he created a whole new mythology here based around the simple concepts of good versus evil and a hero's journey. And that's what I take. I look at it in terms of what's the basis of a lot of people's faith. You know, they look at why religion has stuck around so much. I mean, don't want to get into it here. There are a lot of reasons why it existed. One can argue God created it or man created it. We won't touch on that here, but those concepts have stuck around for thousands and thousands of years for humanity. And what George has done is he's created a new philosophy, a new mythology based on this. Like, you don't have Greek mythology, which is so fascinating. You have this fairy tale mythology that he has created from scratch. He's drawn from many different influences, and he's just mixed it so perfectly here. It was just a recipe for success, especially at a time, again, a perfect time it was released too, because of the state of society and what was going on in politics at the time. But, I look at that. I look at it as it's a fairy tale, a mythology.
For sure. Yeah, you're right there. It's a modern fairy tale. I think that's the best way to put it.
Seeing it as a child at that perfect time, it has such an influence on you, just like today's children or young adults. I mean, they're going to get into different genres or different movies, and that's going to be their Star Wars for them. And you can understand why, if it's that good. So, but let's just get moving on. Let's start with Star Wars: A New Hope. So why don't we start with some high level thoughts on the first Star Wars movie? Who wants to go first?
Wow, it's really hard. I don't know how anyone else feels about it, but I find it's really difficult to be objective about these movies. I mean, they're so ingrained. I've seen it so many times that it's almost kind of hard to critically judge it. But sort of from a high level, I think it's interesting how this movie it sort of represents a Hollywood unicorn in that it's the type of movie that everyone can enjoy. I mean, I know people who don't think like me politically and still find this movie interesting. Kids love it, adults love it. Even people who are not into this type of genre are really they can be into Star Wars and like these movies. And I kind of find that it kind of has this thing that we don't have anymore in movies, where it's just a very simple story. Not that it's, childish or anything, but it's very basic and straightforward and still works. And because now, if you were to make this movie now, you'd have weird, I'm sure, like complications and foreshadowing to all these other things. And the other thing that I like about it that I think modern movies sort of miss is that you have interesting characters with agency, not just moving from set piece to set piece and stuff happens. I mean, they are smart characters who, I mean, sure, maybe they kind of mess up here and there, but, they're sort of active agents in their own destiny as they kind of move through the story.
Right.
It's just kind of interesting how you have all these different types of characters working well together, which is something that I wish more movies nowadays had. You do get that with some movies, but I feel you kind of miss the friendship that characters have. I guess maybe you don't get that so much in A New Hope, and maybe it's later on, but you still see a lot of that come through.
Andrew, how about yourself?
One of the greatest openings to a movie of all time. I would love to be able to go back and watch Star Wars with a fresh set of eyes, with not knowing the universe or anything about it. But every time I watch the beginning of A New Hope and you see the opening sequence, it hooks you right away. And not knowing much about the universe, there's so many different questions, and it kickstarts the trilogy pretty well. The introduction of Vader just as one of the best villains of all time, like him, just, oh my God, like just the imagery of the opening, I think 10 to 15 minutes is in itself, like that really struck a chord with me. Not to knock it down really right off the bat, I don't think it has aged as well necessarily. Like, I don't get the same enjoyment from watching it as I do with like Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi.
Really? That's interesting. How so? Why don't you elaborate on that?
The pacing is a little, I think for modern moviegoers, the pacing is not as fast as people would like it to be. I think there are certain elements. I think we've also been, for example, like the lightsaber battle between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. Like, it's just, I think we've been so blessed and spoiled with so many amazing lightsaber duels since that time. And here we have like two of the greatest Jedi of all time fighting. And you're like, wow, I think I could take one of them on. But at the same time, like when you go back to the time frame, like this is talking 2015, like 1977, it's an amazing movie. I think it, unfortunately, with today's, the way that, I'm going to bring up my father, like when my father watches documentaries now, and like there's just all these action and it's like nonstop. I think people have to have an appreciation for movies to really get that true enjoyment from A New Hope in comparison to some of the other ones that appeal more to like the action going audiences. But overall, I'm nitpicking. A New Hope is a fantastic movie, and that character development, you see that relationship that Nathan talked about between characters.
Right. Okay, Geoff, how about yourself?
As Andrew mentioned, it's an oddly paced movie. It's not slow and it's not super fast. It kind of comes at you and then it takes its foot off the gas a little bit, and then it comes at you again, and then it kind of backs off, and it sort of does that, throughout. And it's an odd way to structure a movie. And the fact that it works is really interesting. It's kind of hard to put your finger on why it works as well as it does. It has such a great look to it as well. I think more than the other two in the trilogy, it has the most unique visual style to it. I mean, I think it holds up very well visually. The lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan and Vader, obviously, they don't have the fancy moves and stuff. And
what are you talking about? He still does a little, slow motion spin, Alec Guinness.
Yeah, the slow motion spin. He kind of shuffles a little bit. And he's got that one move where he just kind of like moves his lightsaber quickly in a circle.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason. And, it's a good thing it's Alec Guinness, because you can buy it. You can class the place up. It's a great movie, and then there are moments in it where it's perfect. The perfect, exact right thing happens to blow you right away.
How about you give me an example of a scene that's just perfect for you?
This is definitely an easy one, but when Han comes back to save Luke right at the end when he's in the Death Star trench there, like that whole sequence there, I mean, it's so good. Mm-hmm. Even it's coming because we've all seen it a million times, right? But the rebels are losing the battle. Luke's pretty much the only guy left. The tension's ratcheted way up. Vader's right on him. You got Obi-Wan talking in his ear. Like, it's so tense at that moment. And then when the Millennium Falcon swoops in, it's just so perfect. Like, it caps that excitement off. And we all know what happens there, but it's so well done. It's so perfect. You're on the edge of your seat for that whole sequence. And just when you can't take it anymore and you don't know, how he's going to get out of this one, it's just great. That's one of the best moments in the whole trilogy for me.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's like I said, that's an easy one. I think there are other examples in the movie, but that's the one that comes to mind.
I agree. I mean, to me, Star Wars has a lot of, if you want to talk about perfect scenes, I'll get into that a bit later. My high level thoughts, unless you wanted to add something else, Geoff, here, just for now, I can get into my thoughts.
Off to you, man. Go for it.
The simplistic style of the nature of good versus evil here, we already get, like, right from the opening, how dominant and what kind of sense of dread the Empire over the rebels have, how superior they are over them in terms of militaristic power. You get that right off the opening shot with the Star Destroyer chasing the rebel cruiser. That kind of level of awe and wonder and simplicity makes it great. Like the minute also when the stormtroopers break in and Vader then comes in. Like I remember, listening to other people talk about it, older people talk in interviews and documentaries. And a lot of people used to say, even if there was no sound, the minute those stormtroopers came in, they felt like those were a Nazi invasion happening, right? Like you immediately felt, even though they've become a joke, like stormtroopers, because they can't shoot worth shit. At least I hear they can. There's just that big sense of dread as soon as they come through. And the minute Vader comes through, it's almost like a silent picture. People would just start hissing at the theater and booing at the theater. So, I mean, these are just like the simplistic strings that Lucas is, using to draw the audience in. And I love that. And the fact that Vader is so dark versus the use of color there. All of these things, again, just the modern fairy tale, how Lucas is building the world. And then what also I love is the world building here. So you talked about the pacing. I agree. It's very odd in how this movie is paced because the first quarter of this movie, you're following two droids. You're following C-3PO and R2-D2 on Tatooine. You don't even get 20, 25 minutes in is when you first get your glimpse of Luke, I believe, when the Jawas are selling the droids at the farm. But all that stuff, that world building, I loved all of that, even as a kid. But I agree. I'm not sure how well modern audiences would be able to take to it. Interesting story. I was at a cousin's house in Vancouver a long time ago and we show these other cousins from New York who were visiting for a wedding. They were about in their early teens, and they couldn't get through Star Wars because of this. But we showed another friend, an adult, and she's never seen Star Wars. She saw it maybe now when she was in her early 30s, and she was wondering too. She was getting confused. She was saying, is this all there is about Star Wars, these two droids? But the minute Luke comes and you get Han Solo, you get Chewbacca, you get Obi-Wan, then the movie kicks really off. And then she was into it. But for me, I loved all this world building. I was following R2-D2 and 3PO. I love their banter. I love the sense of fun in this movie. And that's one thing this movie has, is a lot of fun with itself. And you're talking about scenes of perfection. I mean, I can give you another example. I know when I was gripped completely in this movie sold me, and no matter what happened afterwards, I was invested, is the minute when Luke went back to the Lars homestead, when he realized that his uncle and aunt were in danger, and you get that epic shot of the wind blowing and his clothes are being, moving in the wind, and you see the smoke going, and you see the homestead partially destroyed and the dead bodies and that music. And then you cut away to the Death Star and Vader and all that stuff. That was just perfect. I've never seen something like that in a movie since. And again, going back to that good versus evil setup. And it's just, you're so with Luke at that point after that. No matter what happens, you're with Luke, the rest of the saga on his side. And that sets up that kicks off the hero's journey so well. Another scene that you mentioned about Han coming in and saving the day in the trench run, I'd argue the whole trench run sequence and the Battle of Yavin is perfection unto itself. But for me, it wasn't when Han came and saved. It was when Luke turned off the targeting computer. Obi-Wan says, use the Force. He believes. He presses that button to turn it off. The Force music kicks in and it swells. That's perfection. For me, that is perfection right there. It's not Han saving the day. It's Luke having faith in the Force. And I think that's kind of the point of the movie. But that's just me. A lot of people like Han Solo better than Luke, so I understand. But again, the sense of fun in the hero's journey here is what really sums up my high-level thoughts here. Something I haven't seen repeated since.
Well, I'm glad, Harry, you mentioned the music. That's something ever since I just finished talking. Like, for me, fundamentally, like an appreciation of music, like having grown up with it. This movie, I don't know of any others that has a soundtrack quite as engrossing and defining as A New Hope. Like Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, both are fantastic soundtracks. Anything John Williams does really is gold. But that soundtrack, so many songs from A New Hope, so many, it's iconic in itself. And the music alone is what I think can engross many people into this movie, because it's just, the musical cues are amazing. I continue to listen to the soundtrack to this day whenever I need quiet contemplation, or I'm at work or I'm studying. It is just, it's brilliant. And I think that's another huge element that I know it gets a lot of appreciation, but it is a masterpiece when it comes to the music for this movie.
I agree. I was going to ask about the score a little later when we were going to get into a little bit more into the movie, but how about it's a perfect segue now. So as a curiosity, what are your favorite themes out of this movie? Because these are all motifs that Williams created for all the characters, right? Or at least the main characters. I mean, you didn't have the Imperial March here for Vader. You had this other kind of musical track for Darth Vader when he came on screen a little bit, especially in the Death Star. But you obviously get, the Force theme. You get main Star Wars theme. You get a little bit of Luke's theme in here. Actually, I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, initially to me, the Force theme was Luke's theme. But then obviously I think since then it's deviated into just being the Force theme. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think it's still Luke's theme. I mean, I know it is the main Star Wars theme itself, but because these movies are, they're really about his journey for the most part, so I think they kind of hand in hand.
I always thought of it as it's Luke's theme and it's the Force theme. It's my favorite, whatever you want to call it. It's my favorite part of the score, that theme and the variations on it, because there are a lot of great variations of the theme, all of which are great and reused a million times in all the trailers. I think it's the best one. It carries through that helps tie all of the threads through the entire trilogy, that one theme. So
my favorite track, again, as I already mentioned, is when Luke turns off the Battle of Yavin, and when Luke turns off the targeting computer. When I was a kid, I just believed in anything after that point. For me, that was an important moment in my childhood development, because I believed I could do anything as long as I had faith in doing it. And I think that was an important message that Lucas was trying to derive for young children. I mean, again, when you're creating the modern fairy tale, I think that was an important thematic point he was trying to get across as well. But yeah, I mean, like for the whole thing, I just loved the whole score. We're talking about an Oscar-winning score, very deservedly so. It'll be interesting when we get into the other movies. We can talk about the score. Were they better? Were they worse? I'd say for the most part, I love almost every track of the score. Maybe a couple of tracks aren't the greatest and are pretty ho-hum, but for the most part, I just absolutely love the score. Williams got it right, and I think in the 70s, they weren't orchestral scores at the time. They were more like when you're talking about the gritty crime dramas and the other scores that were happening. There weren't too many orchestral scores that were happening around the time. Godfather may be the exception. I'm not sure. I can't remember the release of The Godfather, the date, but I think most scores then were not orchestral tracks. This was a movement back towards the classical score that Lucas and Williams started here, and it was very impressive.
Can you imagine this movie with a disco score? I mean, there's I think we've probably all seen it. There are like various documentaries, and Lucas really fought back against the studio, I guess, wanting like more disco music. I mean, I guess we get a little bit in the cantina there. I don't know, maybe if it's disco or not, but oh man, can you imagine? I mean, do you think this movie would even be as well remembered if that was the case?
No, because disco's dated. Disco died. Star Wars would have died with the disco track.
Did it even really live? Disco music.
Hey man, it was alive. It was alive back then. It's terrible, but it was alive.
Actually, I would like to see this movie recut with a disco score, just for kicks, just to see what would happen. Oh man.
Okay, so how about we move on to the acting here? The Star Wars is known to varying degrees for its great acting to lack of acting, depending on your point of view. So how about you guys let me know, just for A New Hope, who really stood out to you? Who do you think really didn't work? I also want to, talk about the main lead, who really is still Mark Hamill. He gets often criticized quite a bit for his acting. A lot of drinking games and a lot of stuff on the internet do poke fun at Mark Hamill. Is it deserved? Is it undeserved? What do you guys think? And you can talk about anybody.
I think that there isn't anybody in the movie that doesn't do a good job. I don't think that there's any performance that does not work. Even the bit players do a pretty good job. With the possible exception of the guy who plays Biggs in that one deleted scene that's been re-added for the special edition, where he meets up with Luke in the hangar there. It's a little awkward exchange. But other than that, I don't think it's fair to criticize Mark Hamill at all. I'm not going to say the guy's a great actor. I'm not going to say anybody in this movie is a great actor, but their performances are exactly right. I mean, the story is simple. The characters themselves are painted in broad strokes. So, it's not required for any of these guys to show a whole lot of nuance for their characters. What's important is that they sell the broad strokes to us. Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, was a whiny little teenager living on a farm. And that's exactly what we got. And then once he was thrown into the larger world, the wide eyes and wonder works perfectly. And part of what makes it great, and the counterpoint, we're following along with Luke because he's our hero, and the optimism and the wide-eyed farm boy in this larger-than-life adventure. What helps it work is the cynical Han Solo, which I believe that Harrison Ford is just kind of a grumpy, cynical dude, on a Sunday afternoon. So that's nothing for him to act that way as Han Solo, but he's the perfect choice for the role. And what's great, I think, is that it's a perfect counterpoint to Luke. So they work so well together because they're counterbalancing each other. When you throw in Carrie Fisher to the mix, then, it's kind of like adding vinegar to baking soda. I mean, the whole thing explodes because she's, she's feisty. She's, first, like, is she the damsel in distress? They got to rescue the princess. Well, no, she's not timid. She's very strong. She has lots of agency. And once the three of them are together, I mean, it's great to begin with, and then with the three of them together, then the whole thing just takes off. So it's not so much the acting, the performances are great. It's that each one of them was great in the role, and the chemistry between the three of them is really what puts it over the top.
Yes, yeah.
It's not fair you can't criticize the acting. There's nothing bad here. It's just right. It's exactly what it needs to be.
Well, I certainly agree with Geoff that it's really more the ensemble that's important. But I mean, like individually, I find everyone, maybe the exception of Alec Guinness, to be, well, hit and miss might be a little too mean. Mark Hamill, I mean, I think it's serviceable. I mean, yeah, you hear him getting some flack for his acting in this and the whiny stuff, people laugh at it. But I think overall, it's a pretty serviceable performance. Even Harrison Ford, and I totally agree with Geoff that he's probably just a surly dude all the time. And there's one line, I think, when he's about to take off he's going to leave the rebels to their fate. And he just has this line, he says, may the force be with you. And I can just see Harrison Ford's like, oh man, I can't believe I'm saying this line. And it really comes through. It's like, I don't really care. But, it's not, anytime that you want to criticize actors, I mean, part of it too is who is the director? We all know who the director is here. And I don't think George Lucas can be said to necessarily be an actor's director. I don't think anyone's performance is uneven. There is maybe some weak spots, but it's all evened out in the end by the ensemble and just the way everyone plays off each other. Carrie Fisher, I have to bring it up now. Sometimes she has an accent, and other times she doesn't.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just a weird. And I don't know if that's a actual actor's choice or she was directed that way. It's very peculiar. I think it stands out to me more now. I don't think I ever noticed it as a kid. But Alec Guinness is probably the strongest out of the group, I would say. Yeah, and that guy who played Big. Oh man. So I don't know why they had that scene back in there.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lambast the actor for like what, a 10-second scene.
Well, no, but if you actually there's other deleted scenes that have not been put back in. And they're all actually, you can see why they've been taken out because it's bad dialogue and
it's funny.
Acting is not great.
It's actually funny. I actually like those scenes, but I disagree with you. I like the acting in there too. It's just, I see why it was cut because it would just slow the movie down. The beginning of the movie is already, as we mentioned, oddly paced. It takes a while to get this movie kicking off once the droids hit Tatooine. So to add more of this stuff in there, it would just be like, I think you would definitely have lost the audience. That point.
Oh, I guess. It's also probably why we have the droids for, a good solid 25 minutes because they had extra scenes with Luke early on and then they're like, okay, no, this has got to go. So,
yeah. So how about you, Andrew? How about you chime in on the acting here?
I think it's unfair to judge anyone on A New Hope because I've always seen like the Star Wars Original Trilogy as one long movie. Like it's an evolution of the characters. And I think that's one of the many reasons why I'm so excited about A Force Awakens, because like just when you look at the trailers and you see just how the characters have grown, but you saw that as like a common theme from New Hope to Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. And each one of them plays their role, I think, to near perfection. Like this is another example, like one thing I wanted to talk about before about casting. I don't know of anyone that I would replace like this. Like they're iconic characters played by the right people. Like Mark Hamill, I think we're really going to see a side of him. There's certainly an appreciation over the last 10, 15 years, 20 long, more so in regards to his voice acting. But I think the opportunity for him to showcase like the development of Luke Skywalker in A Force Awakens, that's something I know we're going to touch upon later. But I think the surrounding cast, and we've talked about the main four, but you add Sir Alec Guinness, who's just unbelievable. Like after watching him in A New Hope, like going back and watching some of his older movies, you see that type of impact that an actor of that caliber brings to the cast. But also one of my favorites is Peter Cushing. Doesn't have much time as Grand Moff Tarkin, but oh my gosh, like you just know every single time, like this guy is like a true badass. Like it just any little glimpse of Moff Tarkin, like when you see him in Star Wars Rebels or any of the other expanded universe, I can't really use that anymore. I just love the characters in this. And I think judging it based upon A New Hope, it's part of their story. They're supposed to be bratty. Han Solo is supposed to be that guy that just doesn't give a rat's ass about everyone. And I just loved it. Like that's, you don't have those ensembles as we talked about these days.
No, I completely agree. Damn you, Andrew, for taking Peter Cushing away from me. I was going to bring him up, so you beat me to the punch. Next time I start first. No, but I agree with you. In my opinion, the two actors obviously that shine through the most are Guinness and Cushing. One, this wise sage old mentor who's on the good side. And then you got Peter Cushing being the evil badass on the other side. They're both like almost like royalty. Even though Peter Cushing I think it's Sir Alec Guinness. I'm not sure if it's Sir Peter Cushing. I don't know if he's ever been knighted, but he definitely feels like royalty here. Like he is so good in this role. It's incredible. His performance is incredible. I think he also deserved an Oscar nomination, in my opinion, along with Alec Guinness. I still think that Alec Guinness was robbed of an Oscar, in my opinion. Definitely should have won. Do you guys agree with that? I'm sure we're all on the same board. He should have won an Oscar here.
I agree, but he was also incredibly rich after this. I don't feel it too.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold that against him. I think he deserved an Oscar, but that's just me. But yeah, going to the other leads, I agree with what you guys have said. They casted these guys perfectly. It's a credit to Lucas and the casting agents. It's a credit for seeing Harrison Ford coming in and reading and realizing he's better than Richard Dreyfuss and Christopher Walken. So, it definitely, again, would have been a completely different movie if those guys were there.
Burt Reynolds.
Or Burt Reynolds.
Who huge actor at the time.
Yes.
I don't know if Burt Reynolds read for this, but I mean, I can imagine that he would have.
I'm sure everybody in Hollywood came in and read for it. I think Pacino did as well. So a lot of A-list actors came in. But again, a credit. They casted the actors to who these people were in their stage in their life and their careers. I mean, yeah, I'm not surprised that, Geoff, you mentioned this. I'm sure Harrison Ford is really Harrison Ford in real life. So he played it pretty perfectly here as a grumpy, cynical guy. Mark Hamill, he's the wide-eyed farm boy, innocent, but dreaming of, other adventures because he wants to get off the farm. His ambitions are more than just farming, which kicks off the hero's journey. And they casted a guy who was in that boat in his life, in that same stage. Carrie Fisher, she was Hollywood royalty, daughter of Debbie Reynolds and Tony Fisher. I think it's Tony Fisher. I'm not sure. But so she brought that. You could even see it in the audition tapes and the behind the scenes stuff. She came through in her auditions like a royal princess. So they captured this all here. I also agree, like Mark Hamill is unfairly criticized because he's supposed to be the whiny farm boy here, and it's perfect. He played it perfectly, whether that's the limitation of his acting or what was actually he was supposed to do. I don't care how you classify it. It was perfect.
That's the way it was written, though. Right?
Exactly.
So, criticism is very strange. I mean, I remember when I saw these in a theater for the special edition when they came out, and everyone in the theater laughed when he's talking about the Tashi station line. It's written that way.
Exactly. I never got the joke. They just had to make fun of something, so they chose that line. But I agree. It comes off as a whiny brat. That's who he's supposed to be. So.
Yeah, but then you compare him, and then I know we're going to be talking about the prequels, but you see the evolution of the character. One of the reasons why Hayden Christensen gets so much crap is that he's the same even in episode 3. And so that's a real testament to Mark Hamill, is that I think he kind of knew he was going to come off like this, but this was the character that he had to portray. And by the end of the movie, and Harry, when you touch upon that moment where he turns off the targeting, you see just an immediate maturity of the character. And I just think it's unnecessary, and I don't believe he's deserving of the criticism he gets for this role.
And I agree. And I was going to bring it up later in Empire, but I'll quickly mention it now. Probably the casting agent, George Lucas, didn't know this, but Mark Hamill is a geek. So for him to be thrown in as an actor into this world, he has to sell it to us. So he wanted to believe in everything that was going in around him. And that grounded the film for everybody. So you can look at Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing, amazing acting there. Definitely world-class acting above the other three main leads. But the other three main leads did still such a good job. And their chemistry together is one of the reasons why this really worked. Those Death Star scenes worked because they played off so well off each other. So how about we move on into... I wanted to give a specific shout out to the sets and the cinematography in this movie and across the saga, especially the original trilogy. What do you guys think? Do you guys have any comments here on the sets and the cinematography?
Based upon and I'm bringing up The Force Awakens, how they're going back to actual sets. The cinematography in Star Wars, there are some iconic imagery from the movie, the moment where Luke, you see the double sun on Tatooine, things you just don't get those types of sets and those surroundings these days when it comes to big budget movies and their emphasis on CGI. And it really is a perfect example of how, with the right surrounding environment, when it comes to the sets, and just it's breathtaking when you look at it, and it's a breath of fresh air when you compare it to some of the modern day movies. And that's where earlier when I say modern day audiences aren't going to appreciate it as much, I think after The Force Awakens, that's where they're going to get an appreciation, because there's a desire to go back to traditional sets, to not use as much CGI or use it sparingly and precisely in such a way that it just enhances what they've done. So cinematography, I think that's another thing that Lucas did a great job in this. Well, he wasn't the one who did it, but certainly the direction gets a lot of accolades for the right reasons when it comes to New Hope.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, how about you chime in here?
I think there's a couple layers here. I'll talk about the sets and the design, the look of the movie. If you see the original concept sketches from Ralph McQuarrie, there's so much vision there, right? A lot of what Star Wars is, I know it comes from Lucas's brain, but a lot of the look of it is from Ralph McQuarrie's original drawings.
Of course, he cannot be credited enough.
No, he can't be. So there's that layer there. And then when we actually get to the physical realization of the sets and the costumes, it's delightfully creative because of the budget constraints. I mean, this isn't a big budget movie. Now, this is a pretty small film. Like, they didn't have a bunch of money to throw around, so they had to be very innovative in how they created the look. I mean, I love the sets. I love how everything looks. I think it's fantastic. Especially my favorites are the Death Star sets. They don't come across as cheesy sci-fi from the 70s. I mean, it's wholly original. They got that real sleek, polished look to the floors. And I love the sort of chunky control panels that are everywhere. And other than the syringe on the interrogation droid, that's the only thing that kind of stands out as like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think the only thing that really stands off for me is that syringe and that Death Star graphic with the plans, like the Death Star plans. The stolen plans is just like a little shot of something going into the big circle, and you get these little flash. That's all you came up with.
But it's kind of charming though when you watch it now. I actually really like it still. How it kind of looks like a technical readout, and it's not all fancy. Like if that's if A New Hope is made today, that whole thing, they got this big fancy graphic going on, and it's a technical document. It's not going to have any flash to it or anything like that. It's going to be bare bones. Yeah,
but when you think about it, it's just like, instead of showing that, they could have just described it in one sentence. Find the opening that's 2 meters wide and send a torpedo down. We saw earlier when 3PO was reading out all the blueprints for where the princess was located and the tractor beam was located. You actually got blueprint readouts. Here, it was something completely different. It was odd. I found that just quite odd. I was always hoping that they would update that for a special edition effect. I never got it. Said we got other crap, but we got, we missed that one.
That's interesting. I never really thought about it. And I think it's charming still. It fits for me.
Okay.
As far as the cinematography goes, the best cinematography you don't notice. Not to say that, it's like, oh, you can't see it here. I think it's very technical, which I think is just more a sign of the times and how cinematography and camera work just worked. And I think it's good. I mean, I don't find it, mind blowing in any way, but I think it just works on a very basic level and doesn't kind of get in the way. But as far as the set design goes, I love the set design. And what Geoff said, I think, was correct, where their budget constraints probably forced them to be a bit more creative. I know we'll eventually talk about the prequels, but I mean, with unlimited money, you can just lose your mind when it comes to creating sets. And I think it actually hurts creativity when you have unlimited budget. Yeah. But also, I think the sets and even the special effects have, in a way, kind of ruined me because I prefer late 70s, early 80s set design, special effects. There's an aesthetic quality to them that works in a way that I can't really describe, but it feels more real than what you can get today with fancy CGI.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was John Barry who was the set design supervisor for at least Star Wars. He might have done the other two as well. But he came from doing some of the extraordinary sets on the Bond movies back then at Pinewood.
So, really?
Yeah. So, like, say when I was going off the top of my head, don't quote me, I might be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did some of those Bond sets from like You Only Live Twice when he invaded Spectre's missile silo. You can see some of those steely design patterns there, and you do it here. Whether it's the same guy, it might be the same crew, because this is always done at Pinewood, like those other Bond movies. So those classic set designed pieces, that art just got lost as technology has developed with CGI. I completely agree. I love all the sets here. I mean, I want to do a shout out to the Cantina set and to Luke's homestead. And yes, we talked about the Death Star, but I also wanted to mention the Sandcrawler sets, like the interior of the Sandcrawler, the exterior of the Sandcrawler. I'm not talking about that CGI edition, even though that's one of the CGI editions I like, where you see the Sandcrawler move for about 5 seconds. But I like the exterior shots of some of this stuff. It's part of that world building. It made it feel alien, yet tactile. And I loved that. So just props to all that. It just grounded the movie completely. And you're able to relate. As we talked about CGI, you just lose that realism, that tactile feel of everything. And yeah, it's just amazing. In my opinion, this kind of set design in the original trilogy has not been topped since.
Oh, I totally agree. Also, the other great thing is that it all looks different. I mean, there's a real difference in the look between Tatooine and all the scenes on the Death Star. A lot of dirty scenes, obviously, because they're on a sand planet, to the sheen of the Death Star, where I feel like you get a lot of movies like, okay, well, it's in the future and everything kind of looks the same. Or you know what I mean, right? I mean, the vision to create all these different things. I mean, I think that's part of the brilliance of the movie as well.
I also love the fact this world building and set design and the Star Wars Original Trilogy in the sense that we get a feel that it's a used universe. Like you look at the Rebels and their ships and their vehicles and even Luke's sand speeder and all this stuff. It's very dirty, very grimy, very used.
Oh, even the look of the Rebels themselves in their X-Wings. They're just a bunch of unwashed, unshaved, grimy dudes. They look like actual rebels. Mm-hmm. Where, again, if you had this movie made today, they'd all be a bunch of pretty boys.
I think also when you take a look at the Empire as well, there's also that difference between how the Rebels look and the Imperials look, because the Imperials look clean. They look like they're brand new, and that's because they're all expendable. Mm-hmm. Like there aren't any vehicles or characters in the Empire that have really survived besides, like, you take a look at like Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin. And so I like the polar opposites, but when it comes to like the portrayal of the Rebels, that's why I'm also excited for the one-off that's coming out next year, because I think that's also going to be able to expand upon it. And I know I'm talking about non-original trilogy movies, but I think that's where the universe has really been embraced by the Disney and the people who are in charge of Star Wars. So I'm excited to see how they're able to use modern-day technology to be able to convey the imagery that we see in A New Hope, because I think A New Hope, in comparison to the other two, has that perfectly down.
Right.
Yeah, I used the word tactile when you were talking about it. I think that's the perfect way to describe it, more than the, necessarily the clean, sterile environment of the Empire, or sort of the gritty earthiness of the rebellion. But every piece that we see makes it's tactile. You feel like you could touch what's on screen. It's so real looking. That's really necessary when you're making a fantasy movie. It's got to be very tactile, because once it starts to get washed out with the CG, you can't believe it as much. And, one thing, when you said about the set design and how it hasn't really been replicated since, I would say, and I know you're not really a fan of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and they used a lot of digital backdrops, but the physical sets that they used in those films had the same kind of quality. Everything was very lived in. It was very tactile. There were different textures and shapes that they used in the physical sets. They're also very effective. But that's like one example, 25 years, 30 years later, that gets lost in genre movies, I think. Mm-hmm. In non-genre movies, there's lots of great examples of set design. Just as a standout, it's the same thing as Nathan said, good cinematography. The best cinematography is the stuff you don't notice. And the same thing with set design, I think, in non-genre movies. You don't notice it when it's good, and that's a good thing. But you need to notice it in genre films, because otherwise the world doesn't hook up,
mm-hmm. And I agree. I just want to also quickly touch upon just again something about the cinematography. You can talk about how some of the effect shots and the editing process. Lucas was actually, I want to give credit to George Lucas here, because he was really unhappy with how a lot of these shots were actually coming together. So he actually stepped in and did he added his input, kind of scrapped a lot of stuff and did some shots himself. Like even before the special editions where they added in some of the sweeping CGI shots of the Battle of Yavin, like the dogfighting, you still had some of that with the actual models, X-Wing and TIE Fighter models. And some of these shots are just amazing. And then we already talked about the opening shot with Star Destroyer and the Imperial Cruiser and the Lars Homestead shot where it's burning, and a lot of these other shots that are just so iconic. I just want to give props to George Lucas himself, because I really feel, even though he had a team helping him here and a crew, I really feel, and this is from what I have read and what I have seen in interviews and special features, that he did a lot of this work himself. Like, his hand was dipped everywhere here.
Oh, absolutely. My understanding is he actually cut together World War II footage of fighting for the special effects guys. Like, okay, I want this.
Like, he actually did it like frame by frame based off, as you said, like World War II documentary dogfight footage from World War II. So completely agree. Like, that was all him. That vision was his.
And then he goes out and makes the movie Red Tails. But, that's a topic
he didn't direct that. He didn't direct that.
He didn't direct that? I thought he directed that. I never saw it. So
he produced it. I think he probably.
It's not his fault.
Dialogue of that movie. I imagine he had his hand in the script as well.
No, I joke, but I think it's perfect. Like, this is where it's difficult to see someone with genius of George Lucas go and make a movie like A New Hope and then go and make the prequel trilogies. Like, that's where it's like, what happened? Especially when you see something as iconic as this movie being.
There'll be plenty of time to get into that.
Yeah, let's not get sidetracked here. Okay, so guys, we've gone through quite a bit on A New Hope. I just wanted to ask you one thing. I wanted to ask something that was, because obviously George Lucas's initial thoughts was to make a Flash Gordon serial type movie. Didn't get the rights, so he made Star Wars. But what he added was the concept of the Force. So I was wondering if you guys wanted to have a quick discussion on him interjecting this concept into this mythology. It obviously worked. How well did it work? How important was it for these movies to have something like this where he's tapping into philosophy and religion here? So, Geoff, how about you start us off first here?
Yeah, sure. It probably doesn't work without the Force, the trilogy. I don't think you could do it. Mm-hmm. The exact same story without that element, I think it probably falls apart. It's like the Force itself, man. It penetrated the movie, it bound it together. It's the linchpin here. Could you imagine how undercut a lot of the drama is if that element's not there?
Of course.
There's no weight or poignancy to Darth Vader, to the Jedi, to the Death Star battle, where he turns off the targeting computer, because I do agree that that's one of the finest moments in the film. None of that stuff really works if the Force isn't present here. So, good on George to find that extra element that elevates this above, what would have been a cheap Flash Gordon ripoff. This is how it's done. I mean, not just the Force itself, but what it allowed him to do, because without the Force, then there's no Jedi Knights. Like, that's not a thing, right? There's no dark side. The evil isn't as evil and the good isn't as good. So it makes that universe so much larger with this addition.
Yes,
I totally agree. I mean, we probably never have even seen Star Wars if the element of the Force was not added. Because, otherwise it is, I don't even know if I'd even call it a cheap knockoff of Flash Gordon. It would just be boring otherwise. And because these movies are about good versus evil, that would almost not even matter if you didn't have the spiritual essence of the Force. And I think the other thing that it adds, I guess maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I mean, it also sort of adds this religious quality that is I'm not a religious scholar, but my understanding is that some of these concepts kind of come from Buddhist teachings, also like nature worship as well, which I want to talk about a little bit later about good and dark side of the Force. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I don't even think we would have bothered to even watch these movies, and they would only be Star Wars if the Force was not added as an element.
I think it's really the essence of not only the movies, but of life, of like being a part of something much larger than yourself and having the faith to let go and let things play out that the way they're supposed to, but also realizing that you do have an impact. So like so many iconic moments throughout the movie, like one of which you guys talked about is like Luke trusting in the Force in order to hit the target, but also it was Obi-Wan's self-sacrifice and like still being a part of the Force to help guide Luke through his journey and allowing him to give them time to escape the Death Star. Like, there are just so many elements, and I love the mysterious aspect of the Force. It's not really touched upon throughout the entire original trilogy. Like, they don't bother to explain the Force because it doesn't really need to be explained. It's just something that you have to have faith in. And I think that, of course, is like religious themes that we see, and it's playing out today, it plays out for eternity when it comes to humanity. But I think really, like, as the guys mentioned, like without the Force, it would have been just another sci-fi movie.
Yeah, I agree with all of you guys. It needs to be here. Otherwise, I think the movie still would have worked with something different and unique. It wouldn't have lasted this long without the concept of the Force, because the concept of faith and anyone who can believe in it, it's mysterious, but anyone who can believe and train and believe in the good side, at least from Luke's perspective, because that's our perspective, we can do anything that's possible. And that's a hook for any age group. It doesn't matter. You can look, it's targeted to boys, targeted to girls, targeted to young people, targeted to old people. And that's what sets the tone for a fairy tale. And that's why it is the modern fairy tale. And yes, Nathan, you're right. Like, he tapped into Buddhism here. He tapped into the dualism of Chinese yin and yang, like the light side versus the dark side. There's other concepts here. I think one of them was Manichaeism. I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but that struggle between the light and the dark, and the dark is always swallowing the light, which is what the Sith is trying to do. So I think he's tapped into a lot of these different Eastern philosophies, Eastern Western philosophies, kind of set the stage here for the modern fairy tale. And it worked very, very well. It was one of the strengths of the movies for sure. So just before we get to now final thoughts, is there anything else that someone wanted to point out, like a highlight of the story, something else that worked? An interesting concept here is this kind of really works as a standalone film, even though Darth Vader survives, and that concept of Luke trying to go after Darth Vader or avenge his father from this story point's perspective is still out there. But what do you guys think about this movie just as a standalone film? Is it a perfect standalone film, or did it still needed to get resolved? Andrew, how about we start with you this time?
I don't think it's a perfect standalone film. It could be, but I still think there are questions that are left unanswered that really you need the rest of the trilogy to play out. Like Vader escaping, like how often does like the villain actually escape? That duel that is coming between Luke and Vader, like having it just end with Obi-Wan, like there's an element of, I don't want to necessarily say revenge, but that character arc really has to come to a conclusion. So while it could, and I think if it was a standalone, it certainly wouldn't have been as successful. I think it definitely needs the other two movies to make it a complete film.
I don't know. I think I'm a little more forgiving as far as saying it can stand on its own. I mean, there is, the dangling thread of Vader at the end, but I think it stands more on its own than the other two.
Yeah, but I think I want to give the credit where credit is due when it comes to this movie. And like the reason I say it's not standalone is because you want so much more. Is that like you wouldn't be satisfied coming out of like oh my god, like I need to see more of this movie.
Sure, granted. I mean, there's any number of movies I can think of that don't have sequels that I really wish this had a sequel. But no, I mean, like just from a purely objective standpoint, I think it works on its own well enough. Right. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, obviously, if I just seen this movie, like, yes, I need more. Give me more George Lucas. I need more of this. As far as as a production, it stands on its own.
I think absolutely this stands on its own. Obviously you want more because it's so good, but it's not like it's incomplete. It's a complete story. It's a complete movie. It is the only one of the entire saga that you could take out and watch by itself. Like you don't just sit down and watch Return of the Jedi. Like if I want to watch Return of the Jedi, I watch all three. So it absolutely stands on its own. Is it a perfect movie? No, but it's pretty goddamn close.
So what are its flaws?
What are its flaws? I think that, the lightsaber duel doesn't have enough weight to it. It feels like it's going to have all the weight to it, and the ending, how it resolves itself, works really well, but just the battle itself isn't quite dramatic enough. The dialogue during the fight's great, but there's no moves, and that wasn't how it was designed. They didn't really kind of know what they were doing. So I can forgive it's more a production challenge than anything else that doesn't work here. Other things that don't work, again, the Biggs didn't work for me. And that one scene that they added back in the special edition, I don't know if I think of the special edition as A New Hope now. I mean, you can't really go and see it how it originally was anymore unless you have an old VHS tape, I don't think. So, and that's fine with me. I mean, I think that a special edition is fine. So I'll talk about it as if that's the one, so the scene with Biggs doesn't work. It's weird. And that's probably it.
Well, that sounds pretty perfect to me.
Yeah, it's
from your perspective.
It's pretty damn close. It is. It is very, very close to being perfect. But yeah, it's about as close to perfect as any movie I've seen. That's for sure.
As far as flaws, yeah, I mean, that lightsaber duel was not nearly as epic as it should be. There's a lot of performance here and there that's kind of weird. It doesn't. I don't think necessarily takes you out completely, but I know for me, like, I've seen the movie so many times. I mean, I just can notice there are little things that will bug me. The one thing that always still, I mean, I know everyone gushes over Tarkin, but I always just thought that the character was weird, because I guess maybe it's more in hindsight, knowing who Vader is and his role within the Empire. But then you've got this Moff who seems to be kind of in charge, and Vader is not in charge. So that's kind of stands out to me as being a bit weird. Maybe that's more in hindsight of the mythology, because I know the entire mythology of all these characters. So
yeah, I think that wasn't really kind of thought about too much before. I think Vader was more of just like a henchman in the initial concept and filming of this movie, and then his role got expanded as Lucas started to develop further stories a bit more, because he didn't know there was going to be more after this, right? Because if the movie bombed, that would have been it. So that's why he created this character, and he thought just Vader was just going to be just a henchman. That's my belief, at least. I can kind of forgive this aspect, even knowing the whole saga as it stands now, because it looks like, I think the Emperor probably would have had Vader be in charge and do so many other things instead of just overseeing the Death Star, which was Tarkin's baby.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's so many in the entire trilogy where you can just kind of justify it after the fact if it doesn't make any sense. But when I just want to consider, just New Hope on its own, that's the one thing that stands out for me. But it's not like a deal breaker. I still think it's a great performance by Peter Cushing, regardless.
Yeah. For me, in terms of a standalone film, I completely agree with you, Geoff. Out of the whole saga, this is the one. If I just want to have a feel-good time without having to watch a lot of movies, this is the one I want to pop in the most, because I can watch it and not have to worry about watching something else again, because the ending of this movie feels almost complete, with the exception of, yes, Vader escaping. But to me, this whole movie is essentially perfect. Are there any flaws? One could argue the pacing in the first bit with the droids could have been cut a little shorter. But aside from that, I think everything works here. The acting works, the story works, the filmmaking here is top notch. So we can keep moving on further. We don't get caught up in just talking about this movie. Final thoughts, recommendation, Star Wars: A New Hope. Geoff, please start first.
Well, recommendation. I mean, is that even a question at this point? I mean, certainly one of the greatest movies of all time. There's so much here, so much going on here that's great. One thing I didn't get to mention, not to stretch this out any longer, but what the fuck, is when we were talking about the score, we didn't talk about the coverage of the score over the movie. Almost every single second of this film is scored. There's music in the background almost in every single moment here, and I love that about it.
It's like an opera.
Yeah, it's like an opera. Yeah. I can't recommend in good conscience to our listeners to watch this turd. This is just a cinematic flop. Turn it off.
My final thought is I really want that jacket that Luke was wearing at the ceremony, that yellow racer jacket. It's so 70s. I need that jacket. As far as a recommendation, I mean, it's pretty rare to come across people who have not seen these movies. It does happen. I actually have watched it with someone who had never seen it before, but I always recommend it to people to watch and watch again. Someone says, I haven't seen Star Wars for a while. I'm like, stop right now, go home and watch it. So huge recommendation from me.
Yeah, how can you not recommend this movie? Like, yeah, there are little things that we can nitpick, and I tend to nitpick more than I give praise to when it comes to movies. But no, I absolutely. How can you not, when anyone who loves movies or anyone who loves fantasy or good storytelling or fairy tales, like, I don't know who wouldn't like this movie that doesn't have an appreciation for just good storytelling. And it's engrossing, and it captures the audience, the casting. It's absolutely no-brainer.
Yeah, for me, 100%. To me, this is almost perfect, if not perfect. We're talking about the benchmark of what a lot of, I'd say, genre movies should strive to be, especially when you're kicking off a franchise. Most movies get compared to Star Wars. This movie we haven't even talked about its influence on everybody. I mean, so many young people who saw this movie in the 70s went on to want to become filmmakers. This was the movie that wanted them to become filmmakers to begin with, because it has and has still such an influence in pop culture. It's the highest of high recommendations. If there is a rare antiquity out there, it would be this. What else can I say? It is the movie and the franchise for me, even though I like a lot of other things. I always come back to this if I'm in a real lousy mood. This is the movie I pop in to really uplift my spirits, because after watching this, I believe in anything. So, amazing movie. Nothing more I can say about it. So let's move on to The Empire Strikes Back. Let's start with some high-level thoughts, because this is a sequel to the biggest movie of all time back then. Nathan, how about we start with you on this one? Empire Strikes Back, first thoughts.
Well, this is probably my favorite movie of all time, more so than A New Hope. I think at one time I probably could have recited the entire, all the dialogue in this movie from memory. Even though New Hope works better as a movie, just as a standalone, I could easily just watch this movie on its own standalone. It's a movie that I think it's also aged much better than A New Hope. Again, sets a pretty high benchmark. Up until, I guess, fairly recently, you don't get a lot of sequels that are as good, if not better, than the first movie. Going through the 80s and 90s, I'll give anyone $1 who can just name one sequel that's better off the top of their head right now.
Wrath of Khan.
Terminator 2.
All right. All right. Now I
Aliens.
You owe some drinks here, man.
You know what I mean?
Okay, but they're not. Are they okay, guys? They're not as good as this movie is to Star Wars.
So, but yeah, I think this is again a movie that probably it went in a different direction than the first one, which is probably something that was not really expected, because even though I think A New Hope was still considered somewhat of a fluke when it came out, and actually when Empire Strikes Back came out, my understanding is that critically it was not as well received. I mean, I think history has been very kind, and a lot of people have reevaluated its place in the trilogy. Yeah, high level, this is my favorite movie of all time.
This is a near perfect movie. As Nathan mentioned, certainly A New Hope stands alone a lot better than Empire, but the pacing, the action, and the storytelling, everything about this movie, and this was one that I didn't appreciate when I first watched the trilogy and for a number of years afterwards, but now recently just looking at it from a critical perspective in regards to how movies should really be made. And I can't say enough good things about Empire, and iconic scenes throughout, just the dialogue, the interplay. I'm not sure how much of this stuff, one of the scenes that always gets talked about is when Han is being frozen in carbonite and Leia says, "I love you." And the perfect character moment of just Han replying "I know." There's nothing I just will gush about Empire Strikes Back. And that's why I was so excited about this podcast specifically for Empire, because the movie is near perfection.
I love The Empire Strikes Back. This is such a good movie. Oh, man. What I think I love about it, it's hard to put my finger on it exactly, because there's so many great elements and everything comes together so well. But it takes a left turn after A New Hope. It's a very different type of movie. The success of the franchise on an ongoing basis is probably because this wasn't just a sequel. It wasn't just a rehash of sort of the same thing, or putting our characters just in a new adventure. Everything's so different here, Love the next step in Luke's journey. Just as a character, he's matured here. He's still the same old Luke, but he's more mature. He's taking his his first steps sort of down the path. That's that's the highlight, I think, for me, is we see him develop here. It's great. I mean, not much bad could be said about this movie, if anything.
No, and I agree. Even though I said Star Wars is as perfect as you can get it, the same can be applied to here. This is a near perfect, if not perfect, movie in terms of a sequel, in my opinion. Godfather 2 can, go fuck itself, because this is the best sequel of all time, in my opinion, because it built on what came before. And it was, as Geoff said, it's a completely left turn. It's a completely new take on what came before. It wasn't a rehash. I felt that The Godfather 2, even though I don't want to get into too much, even though it expanded on the story and the development, it had similar beats, even though you were seeing the two different stories, which I liked, between Pacino and the Marlon Brando character. I forget his name.
Don Corleone. Come on.
Yeah, is it Don? I thought, but what's his real name?
Well, I don't know. You didn't even know it was Don Corleone. I mean, come on.
No, I know it's Corleone, but I forgot the first name. So it was okay.
Does he have a first name? They just call him Don, don't they, the whole time?
No, I think it's Vito. Is it Vito? I'm not sure.
I think they explained
I think that's it.
Yeah, Vito could be.
Anyways,
First
regardless,
one's still better. So
I think the first one's still better. But I loved Godfather 2, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying this is the best sequel that's ever been made. And I agree with you, Geoff, because they completely did something new and they took a left turn. They didn't just give him a new adventure, even though it was less fun. But I like the fact that it was less fun and more dark because it gave a chance for the characters to really develop. It wasn't just Luke's journey here. It was Han and Leia's journey as well. And their involvement as a romantic couple and the struggles that they're going through. And I love how the bad guys here, this kind of, even though it's still a B movie serial, it kind of left that a little bit and it became something a bit more serious. And I love that because the stakes are raised here. It's a dark movie and that cliffhanger ending is just amazing. And that's a throwback to, I guess, movies that George Lucas used to watch as a kid on those weekend serials where it would start and then stop and say, and tune in next week for the next one, the next chapter. But this did something similar, and I love that. That's an homage to what he loved growing up. So those are my first level thoughts here. So gents, how about we get into quickly here the story and the acting? Just tell me what you guys really enjoyed, who you enjoyed here in terms of the acting, what really made this movie for you. So, Geoff, how about you start us off first?
From a performance standpoint, I actually really love James Earl Jones here. And I mean, David Prowse, obviously, as well as Darth Vader, but we get to see Vader more. I mean, obviously, anger is his primary emotion, but I love how menacing he comes across because he's so calm all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's fucking scary every time the guy talks. Everybody's trembling on screen. He just kill you dead. Because you came out of hyperspace too close to the system.
Yeah.
You're dead.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
You're promoted. And it's like, when you get promoted on that ship, it's like, the guy's got to like loosen his collar, like, fuck.
There's a great Robot Chicken sketch where the Imperials start wearing disguises so he doesn't know which one got promoted. Yeah. They start wearing fake beards. It's so great.
I love those Robot Chicken Star Wars ones. But I love at the end when the Millennium Falcon escapes at the end and Admiral about to die sees it off and you see the look in his eyes and he's like, fuck. Vader just kind of like turns and walks away, man. I mean, that dude's on borrowed time and he knows it. I love that, but I love how calm he is there. Great performance. And I think we get elevated performances out of everybody else as well. Carrie Fisher has more to do here, get a little bit more insight. I really appreciated that. It's more the chemistry that she has with Harrison Ford that sells the love story. And Mark Hamill, again, like, you know, he's still Luke, but he's more now. We did a really good job.
Okay. Nathan.
Yeah, where to even start? The story, it's kind of neat because I think it's actually a very deft hand that you can craft a couple of these stories all happening simultaneously, and it's all edited together very well. Acting wise, I think everyone's bringing their A game. I think you get a lot of Mark Hamill this time around. The chemistry between Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford is fantastic, and I want to put a pin on that one for when we talk about Attack of the Clones, because I got a lot to say about that. But also the performance by James Earl Jones. Yeah, I guess David Prowse, he probably gets kind of some short riff there because, you know, people never really think of him, but I mean, he's a large guy and he still has to do the physical performance. But Geoff, you're right, where he is a much more menacing character here. That's probably why they do a lot of tight shots of all the Imperial officers' faces, because he did a wide shot. I'm sure like everyone's wetting their pants half the time, like, oh man, here he comes. You probably just on those ships, you just look at him sideways and you're done. And also the performance by Yoda. I mean, Frank Oz does a great voice, and then the whole team that makes that happen. I mean, it's hilarious to think that you have like a major motion picture and a major character is a Muppet. And it works.
Did you guys know that they actually tried to get a monkey with a mask to work as Yoda?
Yes. Yeah, I do remember hearing about this, like having a monkey do that. Just that's what they ended up doing for the Battlestar Galactica TV show. They had a monkey in a weird dog suit.
What?
I don't know if you could, I don't know if you, not in the reboot, but I mean, in the original series, they had one of the characters was a kid, and welcome everyone to the Battlestar Galactica podcast now. But yeah, like they had like one of the main characters was a kid, and the kid had this alien and it was like a chimpanzee in a suit. It was bizarre. Now, I think now, like when you have CGI Yoda, it doesn't work. But if you wanted to go real life, I don't think you would. You probably would not get a puppet ever. You'd get Vern Troyer at best, But I have to say, kudos to Frank Oz team there that put that together.
Mm-hmm. So Andrew, how about yourself?
Well, story, I think Empire is a good example of a perfect example of where you can have like an A and B storyline and both you're emotionally invested in. When you gave an example like The Simpsons as like a TV show where you have like an A and B storyline, the B one you don't really care too much about. With this one, you care just as much about each of the different groups that are being portrayed in this movie. And just the story itself, like, yeah, it's got a different tone from A New Hope, but it is the evolution of these characters. It's the evolution of the story where just because things are all dandy and rosy doesn't mean they're always going to be that way. Like, they still have to fight this fight. And the Empire's taken it up a notch. Like, this is a small group of individuals who have taken out their biggest military installation, and they're not going to take any chances with these guys anymore. And so the stakes have been upped. And I love that progression of the story, saying like, okay, cutesy time's over. The Empire is going to seriously kick some ass in this movie. Mm-hmm. And the addition of the characters as well that supplement the four that we have. I'm glad Nathan brought up Yoda, because I know, Harry, I know you don't care too much for Yoda, because I don't think I've ever really heard you quote him or impersonate him.
Yeah, never. Harry never does that. He hates Yoda, man. He can't stand him.
I know, like I've heard comments such as like Jar Jar would have been a better character in this movie than Yoda. But I think like Yoda's inclusion and just the way that they represent him as being just, when you first meet Yoda, this non-intimidating creature who ends up being the most powerful Force user nearly of all time. But then you also take in Lando. I think the additions that they had to the cast perfectly are able to bring out sides of the characters that hadn't been brought out through the story itself. And so Lando being another scoundrel who is torn. Like, really, I know Lando gets a lot of crap for selling out Han and Leia and Chewbacca, but at the same time, that's like he was only doing what he had to do in order to protect his people. Like, those struggles.
That's so funny, Andrew, how you mentioned that, because I remember that one. Which one is it? I think it's Chasing Amy. The Kevin Smith movie, where this black guy starts bitching about, like, you get Lando, who's a black guy, betrays the white guys and makes him out to be a bad guy. And then to top it all off, in the next movie, the baddest motherfucker on the galaxy who's black seems to be black. He'd take off his helmet. He's a white guy.
But he calls Lando Calrissian an Uncle Tom. That's a harsh criticism. You brought up Robot Chicken. Billy D. Williams has been on Robot Chicken a couple times, and because I get bored sometimes, I watched a Robot Chicken commentary on one of the discs, and Billy D. Williams goes into like a huge tirade of how he's, like, over the years had to defend Lando Calrissian to people just on the street.
Really? Still to this day?
Well, I don't know about to this day, because I mean, does he even leave his house anymore, I wonder? But he's just cooped up with his bottle of Colt 45 there, most likely. But yeah, like, there's on the Robot Chicken commentary, talks about, and in fact, I think they actually do a Robot Chicken scene of Billy D. Williams just getting groceries, and then a bunch of people just getting on a case in the grocery line. And he's got defended. He's like, hey, look, he's between a rock and a hard place, give the guy a break.
No, for sure. I completely agree. Andrew, do you just wanted to chime in just a little bit more before I get into it myself?
Yeah, I just, like, Han forgave. Like, I just watched Return of the Jedi before we did this podcast, and, like, Han seems to be pretty okay with the fact that Lando gave him up. So, like, really, if Han can forgive him, why can't everyone else? But the one character, of course, too, that is an addition that isn't really given as much explanation, but just has such a powerful impact in the Star Wars universe is Boba Fett. Of course, not by name, but just the inclusion of characters, and it's just the evolution of Vader as just getting even more of a badass, like doing whatever it takes in order to capture these guys, because they really made him look bad in the Emperor's eyes, and he wants to make up for that. It's across the board. I said it was a perfect movie, and I stand by that.
100% agree. The world building here is still continued, and that's another aspect that I do love. Like, you get different planets, you get different locations. It's not just a repeat here. And you talked about, like, Boba Fett. Well, I mean, that's one bounty hunter, but I love that shot when he's trying to hire all the bounty hunters, and you get all these different aliens that are there. It's just the world building continues here, and I just love that. And that's one of the strengths of this franchise. In terms of this movie, yes, the story, the stakes now are so much more. It's so Lucas, knowing the success of the original movie, was able to now say, I can kind of fulfill my vision, whatever, Cliff Notes he had for himself, even though things have changed and this history is a bit skewed in terms of how much he laid out and when. But he knew that this was a second act of an operatic piece, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So this middle was going to be darker and the stakes have to be raised. And I love that. And that's great. Movies now start to copy that formula if there are trilogies or there are, franchises and stuff like that. But it was done here so well. And I love that. In terms of the acting and the characters, I love the addition of Lando. Andrew, I'm surprised. How can nobody love Yoda? I love Yoda, man. Come on. What is this? Yoda's awesome. I love the fact that when he gets there, he tricks Luke because he wants to see what kind of guy Luke is, right? He's testing Luke. And I love that. And I try and pretend you're watching this for the first time. And will you know that this guy is Yoda or not? Maybe, maybe not. But it was so wonderfully filmed. And I love that whole scene. And I love the myth building here. Now you're starting to see the Jedi getting trained. You're getting more of an explanation into what the Force is. And I loved all these trials and tribulations that Luke had to go through with his, the cave. Remember your failure in the cave, So it's like, I love all that stuff. The question I have for you guys.
Shit, Harry, that is a great impression. Do you have like a synthesizer? Honestly,
no, that was just me.
Wow, that's the first time I've ever heard Harry do a Yoda impression.
But I actually have a question for you guys. Yoda himself now, because he was a puppet, so well done. I believe it. I know you guys believe it. Do you think modern audiences would sell to modern audiences today? That he's a Muppet, not a CGI character? What do you guys think?
I'll go first here. I mean, first of all, I can't believe that I believe it. I can't believe that it works. I'm still shocked to this day. It's so fucking crazy. It's so good. And it works. It shouldn't. It's a little green Muppet and he's got this goofy voice. And how did they pull this off? Honestly, I don't know how they pulled this off. If you've never seen Star Wars and you're rolling into this now and you got to watch this puppet on screen instead of a CG character, honestly, I think yes. I think yes, you could do it because somehow they made it work. It was just as risky then as it would be today. And they somehow made it work. I don't know what spell they put on us to fucking land it because it's so fantastic, but they did. So, good for them.
Yeah, I think it would work now. I mean, maybe only the most cynical person would be like, oh, that's just a stupid puppet. But, one of the problems that CGI characters have, at least in my opinion, is that you can tell that they have no mass. There's nothing there. And the way Yoda moves in Empire is that of an old man. He moves around. I mean, there's maybe some problems with the way his mouth moves and stuff, but the expressions on his face work well. The eyes, whereas now we get characters. Well, probably the best way to almost prove it is that CGI Yoda, I think, looks terrible. And I think now, I think it would be too risky now to try it. I mean, they'll just say, yeah, we'll just do it in the computer. Look, guys, just look at the tennis ball. Just imagine it's the little green guy. We'll do it in post. I think if somebody wanted to take a risk and do it again, I think they could do it. And it would work. And I think if you're seeing this for the first time now, a movie from almost 40 years ago, I think you can buy it. The performances are there to sell it.
I'd take any of the live action Yoda, the puppet, over CGI any day. I just think there's that emotional connection with the character. When you see him, he's not a creation. He's there. And he plays into the whole believing aspect of the Force. And when you see this character, you're like, oh, look, it's a puppet. It's this little guy. There's no way. And over the progression of the movie, there's this emotional attachment and you see what he's capable of doing. But there is that connection between him and Luke Skywalker. And it's a testament, I think, to the acting of Mark Hamill to really have that bond with this puppet that creates this character that really has transcended both trilogies. It's just amazing what they're able to accomplish. And I hope they're able to do something similarly when it comes to the upcoming trilogy as well. So I do think it appeals to the modern audiences when you see that amazing ability that everyone who was involved in the Yoda character was able to accomplish on screen.
And I agree. I think it was definitely a risk. I think if this did not work, the movie and the franchise would have stopped here. if Yoda didn't work at all. And I agree with you. I think it's, a tribute to three people here. You got the director, Irvin Kershner, who allowed this to work. And still with George's vision, of course. You got Frank Oz, who did the puppeteering and the voice. And again, as you said, Andrew, and I was going to get into it, Mark Hamill, he sells this. If Mark doesn't sell it to the audience and if he doesn't believe it, we don't believe it. And again, it's a testament to what he did as an actor. Now, again, is he the greatest actor in the world? No. But because he's a geek and he believes in this universe, like he is able to imagine himself in this universe and there on set. Again, a credit because it's a tactile, practical set that he is able to give a chance to believe and attach himself to and get immersed in. He sells this to us, and it's amazing. And Hamill is amazing through this whole thing. We touched upon his performance in the original one, how he's just the wide-eyed farm boy, and that kicks off, and he's a bit more whiny and unsure of himself and wants that adventure and longing for it. In this one now, he's a leader, and he's a bit more cocky. He's kind of like that stage as a young adult, late teens, early 20s, where you think you can do anything. In his fight with Vader, like you see how, I think he says, find out I'm full of surprises, and then he loses his lightsaber to Darth Vader quickly there because he was just getting a bit too overconfident and cocky. This is where the character is supposed to be in this narrative, and he did it well. It's a tribute to the writing, directing, and the acting. I also wanted to point here, I just did watch Empire pretty recently. Harrison Ford does give a really good performance here. This is one of his better performances. He's just bang on in every scene. He's a scene stealer. A lot of quotes from this movie really come from either him, Yoda, or Darth Vader. I also liked Carrie Fisher. I think, Geoff, as you mentioned, their chemistry is there. The love story works. I even like 3PO. Nobody's mentioned 3PO here. Do you guys think he gets annoying? I love the humor, the witty banter he has between him and Harrison Ford. It might get a bit too much, but I love the humor that he interjects here. And he did it in the first one. We haven't really talked about 3PO. I wanted to get into it now. What do you guys think of the character, and what do you think of him in this movie?
I've never really had too much of an issue with 3PO. I don't know where, besides the prequels, but we'll talk about that. Yeah, I thought like the inclusion of 3PO and R2-D2 was done very well throughout the movie itself. I don't see where the hatred or where any of I'm baffled as to hear why people would be upset with 3PO in this movie.
I just think people just get annoyed. He's just too much, too whiny, too prissy. But that's who he's supposed to be, like the worrywart. So how about yourself, Nathan?
Oh, well, he's the butler. So, that's kind of his role that he plays. Yeah, again, he gets a lot of flack, I think. Him and, maybe not R2, but I think he doesn't play necessarily a huge role in A New Hope. In here, I think the banter between him and Harrison Ford work really well. It's actually kind of interesting that they split up the droids, because they're supposed to be kind of a comic relief pair in the first one, and then here they serve two entirely different functions. I don't really get the hate. And he's a delicious cereal, too.
Yes, I am guilty as that. C-3POs were awesome.
I miss that cereal. I really do. And the mask.
Yeah, you got the mask. You got to cut it out, right?
Oh, yeah.
On the box. Yeah, I remember that. How about you, Geoff?
I love C-3PO. They did a really interesting thing here, as Nathan said, where they split up the droids, which lets them do two things. Luke, further bonds with R2-D2, which is another one of those things that shouldn't work, but it does. It's the amount of personality that's in that upside down trash can with a dwarf inside is pretty mind blowing. And Mark Hamill sells the relationship, so that is a big piece of why it works, and it's great. C-3PO, and then it's an unexpected banter with Han Solo. They didn't need to throw that in there, or it could have been with another character. So it works so well. I love their exchange. It's hilarious. And 3PO, he's kind of whiny, but you still twinge a little bit when he gets taken apart there and blasted apart by the stormtroopers. So I can't. Anybody hates C-3PO? Come on. Feel free to listen to another goddamn podcast. It's C-3PO.
Yeah, I agree. I love 3PO here, especially in this movie. And I liked him in the first one, but I think this seals the deal for me. His humor was just perfect. I love the banter. Yeah, and again, the stakes are raised. Like, he gets injured as well. as you said, gets blasted apart by the stormtrooper. Yeah, and again, going back to the characters and the acting, Vader himself, again, this is the movie that kind of cemented his iconography, ingrained himself in pop culture here. So scary. You guys touched upon all this stuff before. So perfect. I think any other Star Wars movie in the future coming up here is going to have a very hard time topping the bad guys of Vader and the Emperor himself. But that's a separate story. How about we now just quickly talk about the revelation? This is the moment that kind of everybody thinks about when they think of the Star Wars Original Trilogy. Darth Vader reveals himself to be Luke Skywalker's father.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw it as a little kid, and I heard that this is the common reaction is that for kids is that I didn't believe it. I thought he was lying. And I carried that through until, I saw Return of the Jedi. So, I was in the same place as Luke. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, no, there's no way. There's just no way. Now, okay, so there's two things. So one, the scene itself after the epic lightsaber duel and, the situation there where Luke's kind of, out on that weird whatever the hell thing that is, and he's got nowhere to run. So great setting there. I mean, it's the setup for the scene is so good. I mean, the tension's so high and it's unexpected. It's so unexpected. So when that revelation comes and you're already like at the edge of your seat and you can't believe it because Luke loses, he's lost the battle, which you don't expect a hero to lose the duel, and he does, and he's got nowhere to go. And then on top of all of that, boom, you get the revelation. I mean, it's so tense. It's like, shit, what else could go wrong at this moment now for Luke? Like you're completely rattled in a good way. I mean, it's just unexpected. I think that's great. I think, unfortunately, because of that, like we start to get these kinds of revelations now and these connections now in movies. It's handled very poorly, and we talked about this with Spectre on our last one there, where they don't quite pull off these revelations very well, and it tends to make the universe smaller. So is that the case here? Is that happening here as well? I don't know. I mean, now if you think of it objectively, it kind of feels like it's a pretty big coincidence now. Doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It makes the universe smaller, but the interesting concept here is that Obi-Wan lied.
Yeah, well, that's another layer on top of it as well.
So there's more layers here.
Yeah.
Andrew, how about yourself?
I really wish that I could have watched this movie for the first time not knowing that spoiler.
Oh.
Yeah. So at the time when I watched this, like I was in junior high, I didn't get the opportunity to watch this in the theaters. And thanks to The Simpsons, amongst other, I still think that's one of my favorite Simpsons scenes of all time. And I do quote it on numerous instances. But it is that emotional impact of finding out that Vader is Luke's father. It's just, you don't get that these days. It's one of the reasons why with the upcoming movie, I'm trying to distance myself as much as possible. And Harry, I know you've talked numerous times about how like the revelation of Khan in Into Darkness, just it really impacted your soul and you felt that much more than Vader's reveal. And it was so much better done. I joke because I know, Harry, you're going to kill me when you see me for even joking about it.
Oh, yeah, you're in trouble, buddy.
You just got to disconnect you off the fucking show, and that'll be it.
I think that's where, as movie audiences these days, or movie audiences in general, are so thirsty for spoilers. And I kind of had that feeling when I was going to watch the prequel. Like, my friend was always giving me crap about, like, trying to spoil the movie. And I think really in order to enjoy the experience itself, like you should go in with as little information as possible. And I love the impact this has. I hope they do something similar that's completely out of left field, that it also makes sense at the same time. Like it brings everything together and has that much more of an impact for Luke. So while unfortunately I couldn't watch it for the first time with that experience, I can't wait to share that experience with people who are unaware of this impact. Like, and I love seeing reaction videos on YouTube of kids who don't know that Vader is Luke's father. And it's just, it's one of the classic moments of cinema for sure.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to save that spoiler for my kids. Right now, they know I love Star Wars. They know of Star Wars. They say Vader's bad. They know Luke and they know Chewbacca, and that's it. And I'm trying to, save that for them. It'll be interesting. But then the question I have for you then, since you knew the spoiler, Andrew, did this lessen the impact of that scene when you first watched it?
Oh, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. Like there still was a huge impact with the scene. That the way that the scene is done, just how Vader looks and Luke is just like, he's done. Like he is beaten. And Vader's like, I'm going to kick you in the balls with this one. It's an amazing scene, but that impact like of just not knowing something that has just such a profound impact on the entire trilogy. As I said, like I really missed out on experiencing that without knowing that Vader was Luke's father.
I don't remember what my first reaction was when I was a kid, but I'm a gullible person, so I probably just bought it. And apparently everyone else thought it was a lie. And this is one of my favorite scenes out of the movie, and it's one where I'll rewind it back to the beginning on the gangway there and, watch it a couple of times. I think the way the scene plays out is great, even though I know what the reveal is. And it's so ingrained in pop culture. Everyone that I've ever met has not seen Star Wars knew that this was, the big reveal. So I've watched it with someone who had not seen it before, but they knew it. But I think that the scene maybe doesn't have the full weight behind it, but it's still, because the scene is so interesting, I think it still plays out well enough.
Yeah, I agree. Like you, I don't have a full recollection of that memory or my surprise when I first saw it in theaters, because I saw it a back-to-back of Star Wars A New Hope and Empire for the first time ever. Probably because my mind was blown and I went into a self-induced coma, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it's an amazing twist. It still stands up today. Even though I know the spoiler, I'm still excited with that conversation when he reveals it. It's so well played out and done. It's like a classic Shakespearean moment where you're just revealing this twist, and it's so great. I just love it. How about the ending? Like the fact that this movie ends with unresolved threads. Like it's a cliffhanger ending, that throwback that Lucas has. He knows he's making a third one because, Star Wars was so successful. Do you guys think that worked, or do you think that this didn't work, or do you think that this might actually not work with modern audiences today? What do you guys think about that? Go ahead.
I think it works perfectly. Do I think it would work with today's moviegoers? Not as much, because we're all spoiled, and I don't think people can handle the fact that, I'm not sure we get enough reminders as it is, but I don't think people see it too much in movies where not everything goes right. It ends on such a down note that's like, oh my God, like how are they going to recover from this? And the way that movies play out these days, it seems to be like they want people to be able to walk away with at least a smile on their face or some hope. Sometimes there's no hope, and it's a matter of how you can battle back from moments where you're that low. Do I think it would have the same impact? Not as much, but I think it was done very, very well to keep the audience wanting more, saying it's like, we can't wait for the next one. Let's speculate. Let's talk. How are they going to do this? It leaves so many open questions. It was great. I loved it.
I think modern audiences, I would accept this a bit more, because we're such in the world of like everything's a franchise, and so you always expect the middle movie to have these loose threads that are not tied up. I think this would have been more of a shock for audiences back in the 80s when you didn't have, planned trilogies. I think people would have been like confused. I would think anyways. I think they'd find it confusing. Like, wait, it just ends, Han Solo is gone, and these guys just kind of fly off. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas now, I think people they wouldn't necessarily like it, but they would just accept that, oh, okay, yeah, this is the middle movie, sure. I still think it worked. I think it was Joss Whedon who says that Empire commits the greatest sin of a movie and doesn't end. Something to that effect.
Now, that's an interesting perspective there. A movie that doesn't really have an ending. I never thought of it that way. In true cliffhanger fashion, like you walk out of Empire and you got like a hole in your chest, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's not over, right? The next movie's not there. Obviously the next movie's there for us now, it is. But if you got to wait 3 years between that and Return of the Jedi, for the resolution, good Lord, like, would that work today? I sure hope so. I sure hope that would work today. I think that it would. It's a ballsy thing to do, to leave that cliffhanger out there. We definitely don't see that a lot in movies, or if we do, it's because the third one's kind of right around the corner. Like when they made the Matrix sequels, they made them back to back. So even though the second Matrix movie ends with the cliffhanger, and it's similar fashion to Empire Strikes Back, where it's dark and an unexpected revelation, and then the movie's over. But, the third Matrix movie was right around the corner. Like the trailer for it was at the end of the movie. Or like it was right there. Same with the Back to the Future 2 and 3. You have your cliffhanger, but the resolution's right around the corner. So yeah, I think that there's examples where it's been done. I think it would work today for sure. Yeah. And I think it was a great choice for the film because it's just a punch in the stomach. And it's like somebody came along, punched in the stomach and said, you can get that fixed up enough for 3 years. Sorry, see ya.
Yeah, as you said, Geoff, it's punch in the gut, leaves you wanting more. And as a second act in the opera, he committed to leaving the movie on a down note, and the heroes are all messed up and at the worst place they could possibly be. I think it worked then. It was a risk, and it paid off. It would work today in today's modern audiences because I see in so many other franchises they may not go as far as this by leaving that major question open. Is he the father? But they do leave the heroes on a down note, even in today's other franchises. You could talk about Harry Potter as an example, where they've had movies and they're in deep water trouble and it's got to get resolved in the next movie. So I think you see it also in today's TV show. I mean, the next time I saw this kind of like punch in the gut happen, and it's like, oh my God, I need to see what's happening, was when Riker goes, Mr. Worf, fire. It's like, oh, fuck.
That's one of the greatest cliffhangers of all time. Like, I just remember like the entire summer, my family and I were like, what? They're like, I was excited because I loved Riker. I'm like, oh, thank God they're going to kill off Picard. That has since changed. I just want to let the audience know.
How dare you say that?
I know. But
even as a joke.
I'm sorry. I really hope that if they do have something similar for the upcoming trilogy, I don't want to see much of the next movie. Like, I want that mystery. I want that suspense. I really appreciate what JJ's doing in terms of keeping a lot of the upcoming movie quiet, unlike Batman versus Superman, but that's another podcast. I just love this whole notion, and it puts the audience in the characters' shoes at the very end of the movie because there is no hope. And so you start speculating, like, how are they going to get out of this? And I think the characters go through that same motion between Empire and Return of the Jedi. So I thought it was beautifully done. And as Nathan mentioned, at the time, it was really unheard of in regards to having a movie end like that.
Yeah, I just want to touch upon, I just hope that the new movies don't copy and leave, like the second movie can be dark, but I hope they don't necessarily say, I got to copy and leave a cliffhanger in the same way like this is. I'm not saying someone's going to be the father of somebody. I'm saying it could just be any kind of major twist cliffhanger that I hope they do something a bit different. I'm trusting they will, because I think there'll be an uproar if they go right out and copy beat for beat like some of these story points here. So gents, just quickly let's touch upon, we can merge this in one round here. Score, sets, and cinematography. Geoff, let's start with you first here.
I think that the score is perhaps not as iconic as A New Hope, but still absolutely fantastic. And we have the addition of the Imperial March here for the first time, which is such a great beat. The sets, again, I love the sets on Cloud City. Again, that has sort of a 70s aesthetic to it, but the white walls and all of that looked pretty cool, I thought. And again, cinematography, there's a couple of scenes here that are so well shot. They really bring a lot to the story. An example, my favorite shot of the film is when on Dagobah, when Luke is leaving, he gets in his X-Wing, he flies off, leaving Obi-Wan and Yoda talking about, and the lights. The lights from. Oh man, that's so fucking good.
Oh, and that's amazing.
It's a goddamn puppet. As the only character on screen is a puppet. And the way it's lit, and it's so fantastic. How do they do that? Somebody tell me how they do it. I don't understand it. It's
amazing.
So good.
Yeah, it's so good. I probably wouldn't have brought it up in the podcast, but I always love that shot in the movie. Yeah, good call out, Geoff.
Yeah, one of the things I really love, again, that they, like I sort of talked about this with New Hope, is that all the different set pieces have a very different style to them. From Hoth to Dagobah to Cloud City, everything looks really different. I really like that. I like it, like the set design on Hoth. I think that was great because these guys, they look cold and kind of unhappy, sort of be in this cave. We get to introduce some new droids that have a great design to them, like that mech droid. I think looks really cool. Even though Bespin has that 70s style to it, I kind of like that actually. It sort of looks, I don't know, it gives it a unique feel that I think actually oddly enough stands up. And yeah, again, cinematography, a lot of later on the fight between Luke and Vader, a lot of the set design with, you got the fog and the lights, silhouettes, everything, that all works really well.
Score, I think certainly it's close to the same levels of New Hope. I think New Hope had the ability to set the themes for the majority of the trilogy, but I think Empire, that is another score that is absolutely breathtaking. When it comes to the sets, what I love is that, like, throughout Star Wars, right, like all of the sets for the most part, like you feel as if they're real places. Like no matter how they're created or where they were shot, they just feel like tangible, real, like they were filmed on location in Hoth. And that's carried through even like when you take a look at video games, like you take a look at Star Wars Battlefront that just came out, regardless of like the quality of the game itself, like the environments, like you feel as if you're in the movie. And this is 30 years later. And they're still using like the same imagery that is captured in this movie and other movies as well. So the sets really set the theme for the movie. And whether it's Bespin, whether it's Dagobah, I think was done exceptionally well. And Hoth, it's just all engrossing, just as good as A New Hope, if not better.
I agree. Score, in my opinion, is equaled, if not bettered, here for The Empire Strikes Back. You get an evolution of the themes. You get new themes. Geoff, you mentioned the Imperial March, probably the most iconic theme outside of maybe the main fanfare. And it's just an improvement. I think overall, as a full score, I'd probably still give the edge to this one over A New Hope. I think some of A New Hope's tracks are still very well done, but not as impressive or as exciting as the ones in The Empire Strikes Back. In terms of sets and cinematography, yeah, I do love, as you mentioned, Dagobah, the Hoth base. The most impressive one, and I think the most iconic one, is the carbon freezing chamber. And I even like the innards of Cloud City when Luke are fighting. I mean, what a great set piece and shot when he defeats Vader on the upper level, and the Vader gets pushed back, and then Luke goes down. And he has to first travel through this tube that lights up, and all those details, and then he gets out, the gate closes, you get that other room there, and it's got all these controls and the silhouette from the window. It's all so good. It's eerie, it's dark, very detailed, and still like very, I wouldn't say alien, but the technology there, it makes it really think that it's on a different level than us, yet it's still tactile and tangible, and I love that. And then, shout out to, of course, Vader's masturbation chamber, of course.
First he tells Godfather 2 to go fuck himself, and he talks about the masturbation chamber.
What would you call it?
I might have just said chamber. I don't know what.
Hey man, he's got a screen in there. He's on a comfy couch. He's just laid back. His legs are spread open. What do you want me to say?
One Piece man cave is what it is.
yeah. It's every guy's
screen. He's got the chair.
7.1.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
An Imperial Kinder surprise. Oh, look, it's a Vader.
Yeah, so it is just all in all, just quite amazing, all the sets. Cinematography, I agree as well. There's so many great shots. Geoff, you mentioned that shot. A lot of great shots during the Hoth battle, the taking off of the ships, and it's just everything. It's just all well-rounded. It's good. I can't do justice by sitting here talking about it within a couple of minutes. So I just have one question for you guys. I heard some complaints that part of the problem some people have with Empire Strikes Back is there's a pacing issue. When Luke was being trained on Dagobah, Han and Leia are stuck in the space slug, and stuff like that, even though that's a great scene. I mean, what other movie would have them go into a cave and it turns out to be the innards of a space slug? I mean, these are all great stuff, but they're saying the pacing is a bit low and they start to get bored. Do you guys agree?
No.
Jeff?
No, I don't agree at all.
Andrew?
No, absolutely not.
I 100% agree, so let's fuck those bastards who bring that up. Yeah. Okay. So, again, just, gents, final thoughts on, unless there's something else you want to bring up special for The Empire Strikes Back. Do you think this movie has any flaws whatsoever? And we can also talk about some of the special edition changes here. What do you guys think? Any flaws?
There's maybe a couple of, not necessarily flaws, but maybe some minor plot holes, if you will. I mean, between the Millennium Falcon chase scene and Luke's training, I mean, when you think about it, it's almost as though Luke's training is just a couple of days, because the way the movie is kind of cut together, it seems as though by the time there's maybe only a couple of days between when the Millennium Falcon escapes Hoth and is on Bespin, and Luke has been training with Yoda, the way it's cut, it's almost as though it's just a couple of days. I'm also convinced that George Lucas does not know what a star system is. I think he thinks that planets just float out in space and you just... and doesn't understand what a solar system is, right? It's like, oh, well, there's Bespin, but we're on Hoth, and they call it the Hoth system. So it's Bespin in this Hoth system. And things like that, I think are minor quibbles, but it only really comes up when you kind of think about it. I think the pace, there's enough action and enough things going on in the movie that you don't necessarily think about it, but I think those are kind of flaws.
Yeah, you get so invested in the characters and the story, you don't really think about it. I agree. I think the only flaw that I can think of is just the time aspect of, how long Luke was, you got space travel. So if Luke's on Dagobah for so long, and it takes that long for Han and Leia to get to Bespin, but then Luke gets to Bespin very quickly. But maybe that's because of the hyperdrive. Then the people saying because the hyperdrive was not active, so it took him a lot longer to get there on the Falcon. I don't know. There can be some quibbles there and some logic issues there in terms of time, but I think that'd be the only thing for me. How about you, Geoff?
Yeah, the training aspect is the thing that is the one problem I have here. He goes from 0 to Jedi in a couple days, and those are all really great scenes, but yeah, it is a little difficult to believe that he can even get any amount of training that would prepare him for any kind of conflict. So that's tough. As far as the space travel, like Luke's hyperdrive was fine on the X-wing, so I think they were okay. I think we're okay there. But yeah, that's really the only thing that doesn't work. Everything else comes together really well. The Battle of Hoth at the beginning is exciting and different. The lightsaber battle is so iconic. I mean, one thing I like, it's just a small thing, is when Luke gets to Cloud City there and he's following the stormtroopers trying to track down everybody, and then the battle kind of erupts there and all the stormtroopers are shooting at him, and Lando he's like trying to get a look at Luke. He's like, who the hell is this guy? He can't see him. I love that little look he has. He squints and he's like, and then he gets. And he goes, right? I love that.
Also, the shout out about how the coward Imperial officer grabs Leia as a shield.
Yeah.
I like that little beat there, too. So, Andrew, do you agree with Geoff? Do you think that the training was too short, unbelievable for Luke to mount any defense against Darth Vader there?
I actually don't have too much problem with it because he gets his ass handed to him. He's only there for a few days, and he goes up, and that's why Yoda's like, what are you doing? You just got here. Why are you going to go challenge Vader? And he's like, I have to save my friends. And he's like, you're going to get your ass kicked. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have the conversation between him and Obi-Wan saying, it's like, he was our last hope. And no, there's another. That's the other cliffhanger for this movie that people walk away from going well, is Luke going to die? I didn't find too much of an issue with it. The only issue that I would have with this movie is that it's just not standalone. You can't just watch it and then okay, that's good. And then not either watch the first one or Return of the Jedi. But as I said, when I first introduced this movie, I think it's a perfect movie. I think everything comes together with good reason. There's no pacing issue. The character, no.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with mostly what you said, Andrew. I don't find it an issue at all. I think he didn't go 0 to Jedi. He went to, Jedi in training. 0 to Jedi in training, and he already had some instruction, and I think there was some time that between A New Hope that he was kind of figuring some things out himself. And they show that at the beginning of the film, even though he's still struggling with it, he was able to still pull the lightsaber to him with the Force. And because he's the son of the Chosen One, I'm able to make an exception here. We're supposed to believe that Luke is special, and he is the only one, and it makes sense in terms of the saga. So even if you just look at it from an original trilogy perspective, I didn't have an issue. And as you said, Andrew, it's not like he owned Vader. And I think from when we look at it from a Return of the Jedi's perspective as well, Vader's not really trying to hurt Luke that much. He's testing and playing with Luke. He comes out with only holding the lightsaber in one hand. He's kind of taunting Luke. He says, come at me, bro. Let me see what you got. And then he's like saying, saying to himself, oh, perhaps you're not as strong as the Emperor thought. And then he's surprised and he goes, impressive, most impressive. He's getting surprised. He's testing Luke out. So I think the scenes and the logic is there. So I'm not really surprised. We could argue that he need more training afterwards, maybe. Did he get it? We'll talk about it in Return of the Jedi. So, gents, final recommendation and thoughts. Is this a rare antiquity recommendation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Empire Strikes Back is one of the greatest movies of all time. And I think anyone who appreciates cinema, anyone who, once again, just like A New Hope, it's like, how can you not recommend it beyond everything that we've already said? It's just no-brainer.
Yeah, exactly. A no-brainer. I think I'm going to go watch it tonight, just talking about it. It just gets me all amped up.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Fantastic. Totally.
Well, you got to say it for the record, man.
Again, just a bag of shit of a movie. I mean, it's like a bag of shit on fire.
Yeah, no, for me, it's the highest of the highest recommendations, just like the other one. This is the rare antiquity we're looking for. So all other movies strive to be as good as this one in terms of sequels. So, okay, so let's move on, gents. Return of the Jedi. Andrew, based on the time, I believe you have to go. So thank you for joining us. Your credentials have dropped a little bit because you're dropping us for something else, but that's okay. Nobody's perfect.
Well, I was on time, Harry. So maybe we could have got to Return of the Jedi, but no, I really appreciate the thought and the invitation for this. I thought you were going to cut me out given the fact that I was saying that I was excited for Picard to die because I liked Riker more than Picard growing up, but no, I really appreciate you guys inviting me to be a part of this podcast. I can't wait for the next one, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about Return of the Jedi.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Andrew, very much.
Okay,
Thank
gentlemen.
you, Andrew.
Take care. Have a good night.
Okay, cheers. Okay, so, gents, let's continue with Return of the Jedi. We'll start with our high-level thoughts here. Nathan, how about you start us off first?
Well, I think Return of the Jedi is a great cap to the trilogy. Again, great performances. I think the introduction of the Emperor as this menacing character that has been talked about in the trilogy, a great introduction, and, just a very, very nice wrap-up to the whole thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, we see the conclusion to Luke's journey. Loved seeing him as, he's very different now, right? He's mature. He's essentially fully trained as a Jedi, at least according to Yoda. That's a great job by Mark Hamill there. I mean, it's a great capper for the trilogy. Some good action set pieces here.
Yeah, I'd have to agree for the most part. The only thing I'd like to interject here is that we might be starting to see the rushed conclusion and potential franchise fatigue from George Lucas. I think we all can admit then, even if he can't, that there was a wider plan he had in terms of how many movies there would be beyond like the first 6, like he always talked about the prequels as well. But for a sequel to Return of the Jedi, there was always talk about it back then in the 80s, even though it never materialized. Maybe he thought that this is going to be it for these guys and he's got to wrap it up. I think some story points here got kind of put together a bit rushed. The replication of the Death Star as a threat, not the biggest fan, even though it's not really the point of the movie. But I'm just saying these are just some signs of franchise fatigue and just a rushed storyline. But overall, it's still very good because the main storyline is really Luke's journey, his relationship to Darth Vader, and their scenes with the Emperor. And they were all well done. As you mentioned, Geoff, the action set pieces here are top-notch. The first act of this movie, absolutely amazing. We'll get into it. And I had a lot of fun with it. It was a fun movie all around and a really good conclusion to the franchise. So how about we get into the story itself? So, Geoff, how about you start us off? What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses here for the story?
The first act is fantastic. Maybe it's a little silly how they kind of infiltrate Jabba's palace there, but it kind of comes together. I love the sail barge battle. And one of my favorite parts of the whole trilogy is when like Luke's out on the out on the plank there, and the music starts up, and he does the flip, but it catches the lightsaber.
Oh, so awesome!
So
Epic,
great.
epic.
Yeah, absolutely epic. And that whole battle, it was really good. I thought it was really well put together. I think that's the highlight of the film, is that set piece there. I would have liked to have seen a little more Yoda. I mean, he was, he's in one scene and then he dies. I mean, there's a lot of emotional significance there, and it's rushed. Like you said, we get some story threads that are just kind of rushed up, and I think this is probably one of them. Is that so? That was kind of too bad that we didn't get to see Yoda a little bit more. But again, I guess we're not going to watch more training sequences either. So, we got to do something there. And I know what you're saying about the duplication of the Death Star, but I really liked how it concluded. I thought that the space battle was epic, like well put together. You could follow along with what was going on in space. That's really hard to do. Mm-hmm. I love the flying into the superstructure. I think that's a real strength. As far as weaknesses, yeah, there's definitely more problems here. I think there's some pacing issues, maybe in the second act.
When the heroes get on Endor?
Well, yeah, like I'd say right from when Yoda dies, maybe that's okay. When they arrive on Endor, it's a little bit clunky, mm-hmm. I find. So that's probably where the movie has the most trouble. And once the action starts up, then everything's all good, right? But yeah, I think overall the story works, though.
Nathan, yourself.
Oh, I don't even know what I can say that Geoff hasn't said. I think I wish movies had more often was, especially genre movies, was like big action sequence to start off the movie, right? Sort of a more modern movie that comes to mind where they kind of do it is Age of Ultron. You know, they're all together fighting Hydra, but it's only a 10-minute sequence. It's not a full act the way it is in Jedi. And with Jedi, yeah, like the whole infiltration of the base, it's all kind of weird because I'm really unclear on what part of it is planned and what is not, and they're just kind of winging it.
Yeah, because like in the end, everyone gets captured.
Well, yeah, and see, it's like, okay, well, was that the intention? I don't know. So it's forgivable, I suppose. As far as action sequences go, I actually prefer the lightsaber battle at the end, because I feel it has, you know, in Empire, it's sort of hard to top the emotional battle that happens during Vader and Luke, and here they do top it. I think it's a much more emotional, more high-stakes battle. Now, the stakes themselves, as far as the movie goes, I think have been heightened. I mean, I kind of agree that perhaps reusing the Death Star, maybe not necessarily the best move story point wise, but the fact that now the whole thing is a trap and if potentially the rebels could lose everything here, I think it works well. And I think that the action, I think it distracts you from that fact well enough.
Yeah, for me, the first part of this movie, I mean, I do love, as you guys mentioned, the action. Again, I wanted to kind of point out, it seemed like, again, I enjoyed, and you harken back to the original one, but not in the same way. I enjoyed the world building and the slow build at the beginning of this film. You're following R2-D2 and C-3PO going to Jabba's palace, and you get these wonderful sets. You get to see all these new aliens. You get to finally see who Jabba the Hutt is, and you get that slow build. And I love that whole set design and how they go in, and then you get this, you know, hints of the Rancor, and then you get finally, you know, Leia in disguise and Chewbacca, and then I love her costume. Pretty cool as that bounty hunter and tries to, you know, rescue Han, doesn't work. And then Luke comes in, and then you get the Rancor sequence. And that was amazing. I love the Rancor. What did you guys think of the Rancor? You guys like that scene?
It's a great scene. I think, even though, I mean, it's clearly a stop motion figure. I think it is.
It is. For an effect from then, amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what's actually kind of surprising is that, well, I think given enough time, Lucas probably would have replaced even that scene with a CGI version eventually. It's a little surprising that he left that scene intact, but the entire Jabba sequence, I think is actually pretty cool. As a kid, you know, I thought the Rancor scene was a little scary, you know.
It was, yeah. You got to see him actually eating the Gamorrean guard, and he's like flipping the pieces of flesh in his mouth, and he's chomping on the hand, and you see him swallow it, and it's like, those are great effects. Amazing.
Oh yeah, and there's all those bones in there, and actually, you know what is still disturbing? I just watched it again for this podcast. Was the squealing from that guard? It's a little disturbing because I mean, like he's frightened, and it's like, oh, okay, now he's toast.
I love the Rancor scene, and it was scary. And you know what? I think what puts it over the top, talking about the Gamorrean guard getting eaten, is the sound, like that crunch. That he makes when he just bites that guy and right in half. Oh, that's sickeningly amazing. You know, great. Yeah, I loved it.
I even love the end, even though it's a pretty simple ending. He gets crushed by the gate as Luke throws a skull into the gate controls. But I love how he's still alive. You still see a partial struggle for him, the Rancor, to survive. And then you see his claws finally release and relax because he's finally dead. And then I love the Rancor keepers crying. You know, it's such a great scene. You know, you never see those kind of things in other movies. These little side details that just get you immersed in that whole atmosphere. It's so great. And then, as you touched upon, Geoff, the sail bar, so thrilling and so amazing. It's such a kick-ass scene. Even though, you know, I guess after seeing the prequel trilogy, you don't get to see Luke actually cut into anybody. It's all implied.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with that.
But he uses that lightsaber more as a bat. Yeah, because you don't see anyone losing limbs, which is weird because we have already seen people lose limbs to lightsabers.
But they're still
he just kind of swats people.
He does, but I can't fault the character or Mark Hamill or the stunt coordinators or how it's filmed, because they're probably doing that because they can't show these limbs keep getting chopped up or fall off and stuff like that, because they got to maintain a PG-13 rating. I mean, at the time, there was no PG-13. It's PG or you're going R.
I guess that's true, but I think probably from a practical standpoint, it would have been too difficult to do this because it's already probably a fairly dangerous stunt to coordinate with all these barges that are being suspended somehow, right? You got a guy, it's all crowded with a bunch of guys, and they got to get knocked off and stuff. So I think probably it's just not too practical to do.
I love all the stunts that these stunt guys are doing as they fall into the Rancor pit and they fall down and slide down and stuff like that. Those are amazing shots. There's some great cinematography there from Richard Marquand or the people who are doing the cinematography there. I thought that was really well shot. I love all the vantage points you get to see there. It's really good. And I really love the kick-ass moment when Luke comes on board. He sees that the gunner on the mainsail barge is still hitting it, and Han's trying to rescue Lando, and Luke gets in, and then he just kind of like ignites his saber and like steps into him like with such force. I love that stuff. It's so great. What about the rest of the story after that? What did you think of, I know you said Endor's a bit clunky. What did you think of the father-son moments with Luke and Vader before they go visit the Emperor?
I enjoyed their conversation there. I thought it was interesting how Luke was, he's trying to turn him back. He's not going to do battle with him. He's trying to rescue him from the dark side. And you can hear in Vader's voice, like, it's almost like he wants to listen to Luke. He wants to be saved, but but he says it like it's too late for me, even though it isn't. And Luke holds on to that right up until the end, that it's not too late for him. I thought that was a really good choice. Like, it wasn't just, they could have done it in the script where Luke just gets captured and because he's going to do battle, but Luke basically gets captured because he wants to get captured, and in order to get close to Vader. So I thought it was a great story idea, and I thought that both actors played it really well. Yeah.
What I also like, there's another beat there. I like it when Vader fires up his lightsaber. He says his skills are complete, and then he turns around, turns it off, and then he goes, "Indeed, you are powerful." And he kind of looks, I don't know, you have to read into what he's feeling there. He knows that the Emperor probably wants to replace him with Luke.
Yeah.
So he probably realizes it right here, that Luke is indeed that powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was a really good character beat. How about you, Nathan? What did you think of these scenes?
Yeah, I think they're pretty great. Sometimes I kind of go back and forth on whether or not I think the dialogue works, but I think overall all the scenes work and what Luke is trying to accomplish. Again, if this movie had been made now, I'm convinced it would have been a crazy Rube Goldberg machine of Luke getting captured and he's trying to escape, but really it was all a ploy to save Vader, So I think the fact that he surrenders and is sort of a willing participant in this whole thing is like, well, okay, my fate is my fate. But I sort of feel that what Luke has here now is a certain confidence in his abilities and as to what he can do for his father, right? And I think again, what's happening is that, well, I think that if I'm here, it almost doesn't matter if I can save my father or not, because if I don't save him, well, we're all dead, and that's a good thing. But if I can't save him, then that's a good thing as well, and we can escape, which I think is very good. It shows a lot of character that he's willing to sacrifice himself that way, even though he's probably one of the more useful people in rebellion. I think the fact that he has this mission of redemption shows a lot of interesting character for Luke.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, it's a really good character arc for both Vader and Luke. But I wanted to touch on one story point here, and I wanted to get your thoughts, because I know it's generated some discussion and controversy, and we can get into it here. Both Obi-Wan and Yoda, in an indirect way, tell Luke that he must kill Vader. Now, I've always interpreted that's Luke's final test, because do they have faith that Anakin will return and help Luke defeat the Emperor? Or do they think he legitimately has to kill Darth Vader and then the Emperor? Because pretty much Obi-Wan kind of comes out and says it, because Luke goes, I can't kill my own father. And then he goes, well, then the Emperor's already won. So what's your interpretation of that conversation? What do you think that Obi-Wan and Luke are, do they believe that? Or do you think that they believe Luke will make the right choice?
No, well, I think that they want Vader dead, and it just shows that Luke is just the one that has, in the end, he does become the master, and he just has more insight than those two. Because I don't really, I mean, I guess it could be interpreted that, well, they're just saying the things that Luke needs to hear in order to win the day. Geoff, you brought up the Matrix before, and that's kind of the crux of the first movie with the Oracle and stuff like that. I think that's kind of lazy, because then it allows the writer to say, well, I don't really have to spell anything out, and if anyone interprets it this way or the other, kind of like, oh yeah, no, I thought of that. I like to think that Luke, in the end, is the smarter Jedi out of essentially the three that are remaining.
I agree with that interpretation. If we take a look at Yoda, like from Yoda's perspective, Anakin's he's a bad dude and he needs to be stopped. So I think that they're thinking of destroying this threat as opposed to trying to bring him back. And I think Obi-Wan also had the same thing, because he felt betrayed. I mean, part of it was probably personal. He's feeling betrayed. His friend turned on him and helped the Empire destroy the Jedi. So they're thinking of Anakin or Darth Vader as a threat that needs to be destroyed. I love that Luke defies them because he has the faith that he can be brought back. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives the new start to the Jedi, because the Jedi failed.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with the sentiment. I prefer this interpretation that Luke is the better man than Obi-Wan and even Yoda. He's going to be the wiser Jedi when he finally learns everything there is to be about a Jedi.
Yeah.
You can sort of look at the original trilogy as its own beast, but when you combine the prequels, I mean, it adds a whole new element to this mix, because he is supposed to be the chosen one. So I guess, I don't know what's right now, but I think it probably makes a little more sense that ultimately this was the final end game by Obi-Wan and Yoda. But I don't know. You could still kind of go either way on it, because who could have really foreseen that Vader would turn on the Emperor, like literally the last minute. There is an understanding that the children of Anakin Skywalker are a threat to the Emperor. So it could be that, like, so let's play this one out. One of them could potentially destroy the Emperor. Because, I mean, that's a whole thing, though, too, is that maybe Luke does fail, Vader doesn't turn on the Emperor.
And they've got another one.
Exactly. So they've got a couple of contingencies here. So I mean, maybe they're kind of thinking of that. It's like,
boy, they're a bunch of assholes.
Well, exactly. Well, they got A game, they got B, they've got C. I was like, okay, Luke's dead, Leia's dead. Okay, Han Solo has been blinded. Okay, what about that Wookiee fellow? How strong is he? I wonder if he could take off, or something like that. What's Lando up to? Do you think he's up to the task? So maybe they've got all these contingency plans. Who knows? But I think that they had faith that either Luke or Leia could take out the Emperor. I think they really put all their eggs in the Luke basket. Yeah. And that it didn't quite play out. Well, in a way, Luke did bring back his father in the end. So who's to say?
The logic behind Obi-Wan and Yoda's thoughts here, it's hard to really decide which way it leans. Was this their plan? Was it Luke's plan? Maybe Luke's plan, because when you think about it, Luke's plan might have been, okay, I'm there to distract Vader and the Emperor, and so they don't escape from the eventual attack from the Rebel Alliance and we all get blown up, because he says, soon I'll be dead. And you with me. That's Luke's endgame, is that he knows his plan is we're all going to Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
So that's his role, his destiny. And maybe that's the case. I just find it really odd. Like, I like the fact that Luke would be, and it makes sense that Luke would be the better man than Obi-Wan and Yoda, because in my opinion, they did fail based on what we saw in the prequel trilogy. They're failures of that era for allowing all this shit to come.
Well, it's kind of implied anyways, even in the original trilogy, without it quite being spelled out, right? I mean, Obi-Wan failed Anakin Skywalker with the end result of the Jedi Knights being destroyed. Yoda's role in the whole thing is a little bit more murky, but yeah, based on the prequels, I mean, that's a fail for him as well.
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting topic, and to be honest, I hadn't really ever given this aspect of it all that much thought. I agree with you, Harry, that like it looks like Luke's plan is to distract Vader and the Emperor, or at least draw attention away from the rebels on Endor so they can get the shield generator down. So that's his primary goal. He's going on a one-way trip, or he believes he is.
Right.
He thinks he's going to die, but he's going to try to right the wrong of Anakin turning to the dark side in the first place in the process if he can, So
that's what makes him better, right? And I agree. Yeah.
I think it's more poignant for the story if that's what happens, and that Yoda and Obi-Wan are just like, well, Vader's a bad dude, he's got to go. So yeah, we'll turn his children against him when they grow up. Like they're cold bastards for that. But I think that's what their plan was, and even that plan failed, really, if you think about it, because Luke saw that there was still good there. So now that I'm kind of peeling some layers back there, I'm liking the resolution even more. When you actually like put the spotlight on it, I think there's a lot more weight to it there, and I think that makes it better.
Yeah, well, it gives even a new meaning to Return of the Jedi, right? Because one can even just say even Luke, Obi-Wan and Yoda's version of who the Jedi are obsolete, and I think maybe we'll see facets of this moving forward, or at least I hope so, in the new movies. Anyways, so let's move on. Another big story point, obviously, let's get into it here. Throw down Leia being the sister, that revelation. Again, from my take, it's a rushed ending. I think it's just a coincidence. I don't think Lucas had any idea before that Leia would be the sister, but because he probably wasn't going to be expanding into other trilogies right away, at least sequel ones, in his mind, he wanted to wrap this storyline up very conveniently without introducing a brand new character. He had to make Leia the sister.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think with each of these movies, you show that like Lucas does not really have a lot of forethought into what the next movie is going to tackle. Because in A New Hope, I don't think at any point did he have the notion that Vader was Luke's father. And then in Empire, there's no notion that the two of them are twins. I mean, there's the whole kiss on Hoth there. It's just bizarre. There's whole other like scenes, them making out and stuff like that and making googly eyes with each other. It's just weird. And so when you get to this, one of the big criticisms of Star Wars is that, well, you got a whole galaxy, and yet the biggest galaxy changing events seem to revolve around just a handful of people. So making her the sister, it's kind of a weak story point. You just kind of accept it though, and you move on.
We've argued this on other movies here, Geoff and Nathan. It's just making the universe that much smaller. I think it still wouldn't have been that bad of an idea to leave that thread open. I know Lucas maybe thought this is it. He was going through a divorce at the time. He was in a nasty place. Probably didn't think he'd do any more Star Wars movies. But I think it was a mistake to just force her to be the sister. Makes the universe small, rush plot point. And I don't think it would have been a bad idea to leave that thread open. What do you guys think? You think it would have been okay if they left that open, even though he managed to defeat the Emperor and Vader's gone and the Rebels won, but the sister's still out there somewhere? Do you think that would have been okay? Or did it need to get wrapped up?
Okay. Oh man, here's.
Hey man, this is now the interesting stuff. Let's do it.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that's why it's okay. I'm going to disagree. I was under the impression, if you go back to Empire, so I think that he knew that she was his twin sister in Empire. I think George Lucas knew that in the story. And if you watch Empire, there's a couple of scenes there that are clues that there's that connection between them. One is obviously at the end when Luke kind of calls out to her through the Force to come and rescue him right after he falls out of Cloud City and he's just hanging on that antenna there. He calls out to her and she's the only one. I got the impression that he called out to her because she would be the only one who'd be able to hear him. And even though he didn't know who she was, he knew there was a connection. The other one, and this is a small piece, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, is when Han Solo's getting put into the carbon freeze chamber and Chewie kind of breaks free a little bit, and there's throws a stormtrooper off the scaffolding there, and Boba Fett raises his gun to shoot, and Vader grabs his gun and lowers it, and then Leia looks right at Vader, and he looks right at her, and there's that look like there's something that's there. So I think that was deliberate for us to pick up.
I think that's
later.
A stretch, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, I think the second one's a stretch. I think the calling out.
You got to look at it, but why did they do that? Why did they do that? That was deliberate.
I also could have just intended it that way. I mean, I don't know if necessarily.
Maybe Vader already knows he's got them by the balls and don't need to kill anybody. He'd rather keep these people alive.
Casual, but he's pretty casual
Okay. It just hit me. He's using this because that's why he says, I want these two to go to my ship. You can take Han Solo, Boba Fett, Lando, I want these two guys on my ship. I'm altering the deal because he wants those guys just in case he needs leverage on Luke.
Yeah, okay, so he could...
So why kill him? He's planning ahead. He's 2 steps ahead.
It's more the look that they share. She's looking right up at Vader.
I'd have to watch it again.
But she's looking right at him, and he looks right back at her because that's how it's cut.
Okay, I don't know. I'd have to watch it again. I thought she was looking at Han.
No.
Okay.
No, she's not. So that's why I think that that's why it doesn't feel like it's a problem for me. They didn't need to make anybody's twin anywhere. Like if we go to Return of the Jedi, if they had to wrap it up, I mean, they never brought up a twin before at all. Right?
I'm sure you guys are aware that Lucas's plans were that the Emperor his initial plans were the Emperor was going to live this one. Then Luke was going to go find his sister in the next trilogy. It'd be about training her, and then together as brother and sister, they defeat the Emperor.
I heard rumors about what the sequel trilogy was supposed to be, but I thought that none of that had ever been corroborated.
Well,
I thought that Lucas always said that he never was doing them.
The whole history really is so fuzzy. Though. So who knows where it is?
On what he was going to do, because he would say, "Well, yeah, I'm going to do more sequels. I'm going to do prequels," and then I've heard lots of different things saying like, "Well, this is kind of how like the whole 12-part saga was going to play out, right? And that the Emperor would have like a much larger storyline after 6. I'd never heard anything about him finding the sister and training her. That's news to me. That's an interesting idea, but I mean the whole thing with Leia being the sister, yeah, it makes the universe smaller, but again, you just accept it because the fact that we have the Force in play. There's a lot to be said for people's destinies being intertwined with each other. That's sort of the magical nature of these movies. Now, if this was Star Trek and you pulled that shit, I mean, it would not fly at all, right? If you suddenly found out that Spock was Kirk's brother or something crazy like that, I mean, people would lose their minds. But I think it works well for a fantasy type movie, even if it is not necessarily the best choice, but I think it works. One thing that using the Force as a story element, one thing that allows you to do is play with the idea of destiny, and that's they talk about it. So does it make the universe a little bit smaller? Yeah, I guess it does, but at the same time, I mean, if it's on purpose, like it's their destiny, and in the context of the Star Wars universe, destiny is an actual real thing. It's not like, when we watch James Bond movie where destiny is just a word that people use for no reason. Like in Star Wars, it's actually a real thing. So I think that it's okay. And the other, just to kind of go back to the twin sister thing. I mean, before the Return of the Jedi, if I'm not mistaken, they had never brought up the idea of a sister at all. So if they felt that they needed to tie that thread up, why did he bring it up at all in Return of the Jedi? He could have just been like, well, I don't have time to introduce the twin sister character, so I'm just going to forget it. And we would be none the wiser for it, right? It would have just been Luke Skywalker. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think he already knew in Empire like in A New Hope, no way. He didn't know what the relationships were at that point. But I think in Empire, he did have those relationships worked out.
Mm. Well, I mean, it's interesting either way, right? Because no one really knows except Lucas himself. And as you said, he's changed his mind. He's revealed different details to different people. So who knows what the truth is? It's like one of the bigger conspiracies this planet's ever seen, right? It's like, JFK, forget that. Leia. Is she the sister?
Who is she?
Who is she? So now let's get into Endor and now the infamous Ewoks. Did they drop the ball here by making these cute, cuddly little creatures defeat the Empire? Did the action scenes on Endor as they're trying to destroy the shield generator fall flat because they're there? Were they strengthened because they're there? Did you guys enjoy these characters? What did you even think of these action scenes outside of what was happening with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor?
As a kid, I don't really think I gave it any thought. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we've got the primitive Care Bears taking on stormtroopers. And as a kid, I kind of liked it. Then I got older, hated it. And now it's sort of come back to, it's like, well, maybe it doesn't work completely and it seems a little silly. I think, what we're looking at here too is like the full marketing genius behind Lucas. And I think the thing that does kind of work for me is there's a nice through line to all three of these movies of nature versus technology, because I think the Force, as it's introduced, we sort of talked about some religion, and I think there's also a bit of sort of nature worship to this idea. Then in Empire, we meet Yoda, who's a very living close to nature type of guy. And then now we have the Empire, which is a huge technological civilization, being unable to cope with, these tree huggers. And I mean, it doesn't really, it does play out kind of silly because the action sequences are not that exciting. As a kid, I loved it, but when you watch it through adult eyes, they're a little slow, a little clunky. It's hard. I mean, you've got all these little people in these bulky suits that are trying to go up against regular sized people in bulky suits. So I don't know. I kind of waffle. Again, I've seen the movie so many times, I just can sort of accept it. I think somebody new to the series would have a much harder time accepting this fact. Mm-hmm. Like, I have no ability to really separate the Ewoks from this movie, as ridiculous as it is. I would think, though, that somebody new coming into the trilogy, not seeing it before, they would have a much harder time accepting the Empire being defeated by Ewoks. It is a little silly, and the action sequences, I don't know, they're clunky, a little slow, but I don't know. It's such a hard thing to separate.
Yeah, I partially agree here. I mean, I think the Endor sequences in the third act are the weakest part. I mean, I like it when the Ewoks are introduced and they go to the village and, they're all about to be eaten for a brunch. And those are funny scenes. I mean...
And the fact that they don't take 3PO seriously, even though they revere him as a deity. He's like, no, you can't.
Yeah. Fuck you. We're still going to go ahead and eat these guys. Fuck you. You don't know what you're talking about.
He's a minor deity, I guess, in their pants.
Yeah, I mean, those are funny scenes, and I like those scenes, but I agree with you. I think because they're cute and, little furballs, the serious factor is dumbed down a tiny bit, but I think the Emperor scenes with Vader and Luke were so dark that I think Lucas wanted to make these a bit more cutesy to inject the humor aspect here. But in addition to the merchandising of the Ewoks as well for little kids, it's an obvious decision why you went that way, for better or for worse. Do you guys think it would have been better served that these guys were Wookiees, as I think it was rumored to be?
I think he said as much, though, isn't it? Didn't he, that he did want it to be Wookiees, but they couldn't do it, so he just cut them in half and called them Ewoks?
I have no idea if he admitted it or not. I have no clue.
I believe that he has said as much. I believe that is the case.
I believe that's true as well.
Yeah, do you think it would have been better served if they were Wookiees?
I mean, yes, it probably would have been better served if they were Wookiees, because that would certainly give a lot more credibility to them winning the battle. I'm a little bit more forgiving of the sequence here, I think, than most people are. I know they're small, but and there's some, like they were not, really winning this battle. Like everything they were trying at first wasn't working. They were trying to bring down those walkers, and that nothing was working, and some of them were getting they get shot out of the air. And
did you cry when the Ewok was dead?
Oh, I felt a twinge. I'll admit it.
Nathan?
Yeah, I feel a little bit of a twinge. As a kid, I always hated seeing that scene. Like, I was always so sad when it happened.
Right. Hey, that's war, man. Nobody's safe.
Yeah. What is it good for?
Yeah. Even though I still get a chuckle. I mean, I always enjoy the Ewoks being dragged by the AT-ST. Like they're trying to trip it, but they're just getting dragged. Yeah. It's still funny. I still find it funny. But I understand the argument that it dumbs down the battle a little bit when you're catering to what's supposed to be a serious scene. I just think that the movie would have been... I could just trying to put it myself a bit more critical, putting the other shoes on and just seeing Lucas saying, the Emperor scenes with Luke are dark. The space battle is a bit more serious. I have to make this a bit more light, so I don't lose the audience. They don't have a sour taste in their mouth. It would have been more risky if he did the Wookiees, but I think that might have been the decision-making process here. You needed to inject some light into what was more of a serious situation. What do you guys think?
Well, I think it would have worked a little better if the action sequences were a little less clunky, because you can kind of tell that they are having a hard time moving in those Ewok suits, right? And then the guys in the Stormtrooper suits, I mean, you can tell throughout the whole trilogy that they kind of have a hard time seeing through the masks, and they don't move very well. And,
no, but you're forgetting. It's a legion of his best troops down there.
Oh, my God. Okay, but in terms of stormtroopers, what does that even mean, right? I mean, they are cannon fodder for the most part.
Yeah.
Even though they're often talked about, like they're like even in A New Hope. I mean, stormtroopers are talked about like they're elite troops, anyways, who have sharpshooter accuracy. But I think it could have been choreographed better and worked. And because the size thing, I don't think is necessarily a big deal, to be honest. And the fact that they're cutesy looking, it's, well, that's fine, I guess.
Actually, you know what didn't work for me here is I felt got lost is that, you know, obviously you have to pay more focus and more attention to the main characters like Han and Leia and 3PO and R2, Chewie. But there was other rebels that came along with them initially, and you hardly got to see them after that. So
what were those guys doing?
Yeah, I don't know. Were they even part of that last battle? I didn't see any of them. Did you?
I didn't see anyone except maybe like one rebel dying behind something while he's being shot at. I want to know, when the rebels are captured, one of them's in like scout trooper armor. Where was that scene? So when Han and Leia are being led out of the bunker, and there's all the Imperial troops, there's like a bunch of rebels like with their hands behind their head encircled, and there's one guy he's got like a terrific like beard and mustache. It's just very full. And he's in the scout trooper armor. And I assume that he's a rebel who stole like some scout trooper's armor.
Are you sure? Maybe he's one of those clones that's left over all these years. It's aged poorly. That's a legion of my best troops. Yeah. I can hardly lift my legs. You know?
Oh man, who knows? No, but if you go back, it's funny because I only ever noticed that until like fairly recently.
It just amazes me. I think that's what was missing on the Endor scenes, was just a greater grand scheme of land army versus land army. Yeah. I don't mind the Ewoks kind of coming in and creating that distraction and helping, but then I think a little bit more of the focus should have been on the rebels with Han and Leia leading the way versus all the Imperial troops.
The other thing I would like to see is, what do the Ewoks normally use those weapons for? Like the catapult and then the two logs that come together. What else is in that forest that they need that stuff for?
Oh, we're going to need to do a podcast on the Battle of Endor, or what is it called? Man. The two Ewok movies.
I think it's called the Battle for Endor.
Oh, the Battle for Endor. Okay.
Yeah. The first one? Is that what it's called?
I'm not sure.
Right. Can't wait for that.
Let's do that. We need to unpack that.
I made a vow never to watch them again, so I don't know.
Man. Oh, and then we'll do the Christmas special right after that.
Oh, God. Okay, so we talked about these guys. I mean, the space battle was, of course, very good, but I think the meat and potatoes here, Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, we haven't really talked about him yet. Ian McDiarmid playing the Emperor, awesome. He made these scenes work. What do you guys think?
I thought he was terrific as well. Very menacing. I liked it better when he hadn't been added into the Blu-ray release.
Yes, agreed.
Empire Strikes Back. That, unfortunately, I mean, it was kind of cool to see him, but yeah, he was fantastic. You're right. He sold these scenes. You get the feeling of his power, even though he looks like a frail old man. But the way he talked, you knew that he was a bad dude, and you didn't cross him.
It's so funny because I was watching a little bit of Return of the Jedi in preparation for this podcast. My daughters came and sat beside me for a few seconds, and when the Emperor came down to visit his first entrance to the movie, when he's visiting the Death Star, they know Vader, of course, and they're pretty scared of Vader. But when they saw the Emperor, it was funny watching them. They just got so scared and they started backing away and ran away. So that image, I guess, it's that classic image of going back to the Wizard of Oz. I mean, again, this is our generation's or this generation's Wizard of Oz tale. Is that Wicked Witch of the West or Wicked Witch of the East, whichever one you want to call it. He is that character. And he's played so well.
Yeah, he's so much more interesting here in this one movie than he is in the entire prequel trilogy, I find.
Yes and no. I think if we're going to, I don't want to delve into the prequels here, but I mean, if there was one strength or one validating aspect of the prequels is I did enjoy Ian McDiarmid for the most part until the ham factor started going up in the last one, but yeah, got a little too over the top. But for the most part, I enjoyed what he brought to the table there. But here, he was just absolutely amazing. How he's taunting Luke and trying to goad him into striking him down, and all those scenes with him and Vader and Luke. I don't know. They're probably up there in terms of what is best of the trilogy Do you guys agree?
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think when people think of Return of the Jedi, a lot of them think this or Jabba's palace is really what is the defining moments of this movie. And yeah, it's just such a strong scene. I even love it when he's just cackling in the background. When Luke is getting more aggressive, he's, saying good and he's just cackling, enjoying himself. It's such a great scene. And then let's get into the scene here. So then when Vader realizes that he has a daughter, Luke has a sister, and then Luke just loses it. I just love it when the music kicks in there. Luke is just hacking away at him, driving him back. Such a great moment, very powerful. As you mentioned, Nathan, you liked this lightsaber fight. I think as a whole, I like the lightsaber fight better at Empire, but this sequence here is just amazing. I love it when he cuts Vader down.
I certainly think the choreography and the fight in Empire is better, but I think this has a bit more emotional weight to it, and I think that 50% of it is the music.
Yes.
That's fine. Yeah.
I feel the same way. I think there's certainly the choreography was better in Empire Strikes Back during the lightsaber fight, but the emotional weight here is pretty heavy, and I love it when he, that point where he's had it, he loses it and he comes out. And maybe that begs the question, is he now flirting with the dark side because is he channeling his anger here or is he just channeling emotion?
It's good. Very good question. I think here he's channeling anger because he realizes it after the fact, and then he throws his lightsaber away. In probably the most epic scene in the saga is when he spits in the Emperor's face and says, "You failed. I'm a Jedi like my father before me." Such a great line by Luke.
This whole thing is his temptation. That was always my interpretation, is that this is him being tempted by the dark side, his anger, just letting loose, but then coming back from that edge. And I think that his whole character arc was moving to that moment and to this final temptation, and then him rejecting it.
Yeah, because just as Yoda said, and it's a common sense and self defense. You don't use it for attack; you use it for defense. Before he was, except for that first strike against the Emperor, he was kind of just defending himself against Vader. But this was an attack. He had enough, and he went after him, and that's the dark side. Yeah. So what'd you think of that scene, that epic scene, and then what the Emperor says and does to Luke after that? Nathan, give us your thoughts.
Well, the way it all plays out is really great, with Luke losing it, and then looking at his hand, and then Vader's missing hand that he just cut off. Another thing that makes the Emperor so interesting is like, okay, now you kill him and you will be my new apprentice, right? It's so dark and evil the way Luke comes back and throws away his lightsaber. Even though he's still in a pretty dangerous situation here where he may need it, he's like, no, this is what Jedis do, right? And and then the final scene with the Emperor. This is another thing that I love about 80s special effects is lightning effects. I think it looks so cool. You see it in so many movies. Plays really well in Big Trouble in Little China and Ghostbusters. They use the same lightning effects. I love the look of it. Again, this is kind of a strange thing, and we already talked about it quite a bit earlier about, like, was this the final plan for Luke and Vader? Because now, of course, Vader kills the Emperor.
Which is a powerful moment on itself.
It is.
You shouldn't just skip it.
It's really lessened in the Blu-ray with the stupid no again. But
yeah,
I've always loved that scene, right, where he just picks him up and tosses him.
Mm-hmm. But you get that look. He's going back and forth look. He's really thinking, struggling, and then he makes that decision. I love that because it shows how corrupt he became, and he can't let go of that hate, and then he finally did, and I love that. And then again, that's going back to the title of the movie, he returned as well, Anakin. So Return of the Jedi.
Oh,
right? So then the movie ends. Darth Vader dies, but he takes off the helmet and stuff like that, and they have their fond moment, and then everything is hunky dory. They party hard on Endor there. I love the shot with the funeral pyre. Another epic shot there with Luke's back to the funeral pyre there, and you see Vader's body being melted away and destroyed. But his father did return in spirit. And so what do you think of all these scenes at the end? Did it wrap up a little too happy? Another question I have is, do you think another main character should have died, which is what Harrison Ford wanted. I think there are different reasons in what he's saying. I think he had enough of Han Solo and just wanted the character to go away instead of him officially saying it. We needed some more resonance and stakes at play here. What do you think of that? Do you think Han should have died, or are you glad that he lived? And do you think Harrison Ford was right? Do you think a character should have died?
I don't know what purpose that would have served to kill off another main character. You know, actors love to have great death scenes, so I can understand from Harrison Ford's perspective, wanting something a little bit meatier to do in this film, and a good death scene for Han Solo would have given him that. But I don't think the story was missing that type of tragedy at this point. I think if anything, that might have undercut the tragedy of what had happened with Anakin Skywalker, with Darth Vader. I mean, that's the tragedy here. Is
he came back but died? Yeah,
he came back and dies. So I mean, it's it's good, but it still has that tragic ending to it still in a way, right? So I don't think that the story needed anything else on top of that to kick us in the stomach with. And it's supposed to be a happy ending. Like this saga, this type of movie, and looking at the trilogy overall, it's got to have a happy ending. It has to. And killing off one of the main characters, I think that would have undercut that, right? It would have been too much sorrow underneath it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think with like in terms of Harrison Ford, I mean, partly it's like, oh man, I really want out of this contract. So, if they can just kill me off, I'm done with the character. But the other thing, it doesn't serve any purpose to eliminate him or any other main character because it's not their story. So why should we be feeling, I mean, I know they're in the story and they have their own stories, but what serves the purpose of this Skywalker family saga by eliminating a side character that we all enjoy and adding this element of sorrow? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. I mean, they may end up doing that for Force Awakens, who knows? But I think it would have been entirely pointless to do it.
Yeah,
and more self-serving on an actor's part more than anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what happened between Empire and Return of the Jedi off screen, Harrison Ford became Indiana Jones. Raiders was filmed, and then he went from being the main star to being the B storyline here. So I think there was a bit of an ego here at play. I think this is the starting point in all of his interviews. He was pretty positive up to this point. And once Return of the Jedi came around, I just saw a 180. If you go back and read a lot of interviews or see old interviews on YouTube, a lot of bad mouthing comes after Empire Strikes Back, and I think that's part of it too.
Well, when did he do Blade Runner? Is that after Jedi?
I have no idea, but I know Raiders
was 84. I think is Blade Runner.
Oh, okay, so a year later, but he would have been he probably agreed to do that probably like about 82, 83, I would guess.
Yeah. So I think during the press of this movie and during the filming of this movie, I think he just said, you know what? I got other crap to do. I'm more important than this, and fuck Han Solo. And I think he's held on to that belief until now. So I think there's some basis there. Well, it's not really a big point to talk about, but that's just my thoughts. Let's just quickly have a quick chat because we did it with the other movies. Score, cinematography, sets. Do you guys think that this movie measured up to Star Wars and Empire, or do you think it took a little bit of a back turn, started to get a little bit worse, a little more lazy? What do you guys think?
Tough call. It's not as good looking a film as the previous two. There's a weird sheen on everything. It's like it's not lit properly. Mm-hmm. I think the sets still look great. The score again is still fantastic. It's not as good as the other two, but it's like a 9 out of 10, and the other two are like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
So it's still great score. But yeah, the look of it doesn't quite pop visually in a lot of places.
Well, I also think that there's a lot of darker scenes here. Jabba's palace is darker. The Emperor's throne room is darker. So I think there's a lot of time spent in these darker places. I mean, I think sail barge scenes pop pretty good. That's just me.
Yeah, it's hard to explain. It's not exactly what I mean. I mean, they look good. There's a strange look to some of this movie in it, and it's hard to put my finger on, but it doesn't.
To me, it actually starts looking like, oh yeah, this was filmed in the 80s. where the other ones have a little more timeless feel to them. We also don't get a lot of variation the way we did in the other movies, because we've already been to Tatooine.
Already been on the Death Star. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's nothing really new. And then Endor, it's not terribly, I mean, it's neat, I guess, but it's not interesting the way, say, Hoth was interesting, or Dagobah, right? The score, I mean, I like the introduction of, I don't know exactly the name of the theme. I guess it would be the Sith theme, like for the Emperor. I like the introduction of that score, but I don't really think we add anything new. I guess we got the Ewok theme, but yeah, it's just maybe not as strong as the other two.
I agree. I mean, I think as you said, Geoff, it's still, the score's still 9 out of 10. The other ones are 10 out of 10. Emperor's theme, the Jabba's Palace, their theme, the Rancor scene, Sail Barge, Luke and Vader fighting when that score kicks in. Those are the highlight tracks for me. I think the rest of the tracks are a little bit more repetitive, but it's still a very good score. You also get, I think, the introduction, the brand new theme here as well, the brother-sister theme, which is still a very good theme as well. That's also a nice theme. Yeah, the Ewok theme is, while fun and light, could do without it, but it's okay. We had Richard Marquand directing this. I don't know who the cinematographer is here, but I heard a lot that George was ghost directing behind the scenes here. Do you think that this matched up to the other two, or do you think it was a step back and we're just trying to rush this thing to a close?
Well, I think it's serviceable as far as cinematography goes. I mean, I think there's probably more effort put into space battle. Remember, too, a lot of this movie takes place outdoors. That's I think in the early 80s, they use as much natural lighting as possible. I mean, I think the cinematography in the Emperor's throne room, it's all dark. It's kind of hard. I kind of find it hard to tell if that's intentional or they're just like, oh shit, we gotta light it, make it dark.
Yeah,
I kind of agree as well. It doesn't quite measure up, I don't think, to the previous two. The space battle is an exception. I mean, it looks fantastic.
Especially that first shot when the TIE fighters just swarm the Millennium Falcon. That's just so good.
Great shot. Yeah, and there's a lot of really great moments in the space battle there. There's a lot of tension as they're approaching the Death Star, and it's like everything's just a little too quiet, and then they realize that it's a trap, and that's great. I love when the Super Star Destroyer crashes into the surface of the Death Star. That was
actually, that's the one shot I never liked.
It looks kind of phony, maybe, but
yeah, it's just a little too simple, very too stationary. Even though I guess in space, if it was real, it would move that slow and wouldn't really blow apart so much. But it was just, I don't know, it didn't look like it fit in the universe there. Yeah, I just felt it was a bit more rushed. That's why I kind of wanted to bring some of this stuff up. How about some final thoughts on Return of the Jedi here? How does it stand to the rest of the other two movies that came before it? Does it wrap up the trilogy well, and does it stand the test of time? Nathan, you go first.
I think it stands the test of time. I mean, if we want to rank them, I mean, this would be the number 3 for me, but I mean, it's just by a tight margin. And I think it's a nice cap to the story. I mean, sure, it's a happy ending, but I got no qualms with that. The other thing, though, too, is that it also wraps up everyone's storyline neatly. Even though the movie is mostly about Luke and his journey, I think everyone else's stories have a nice tidy bow on the end.
I definitely think it stands the test of time. I think it holds up really well. I don't get the feeling too much that you're getting that it was rushed conclusions I mean, there are some parts, I think, non-important parts that do feel a little rushed, but I think the important threads are dealt with properly. The conclusion to Luke's journey and Anakin's journey as well, I think, is beautifully handled here. I think that's one of the highlights of the trilogy is the final battle there. I think the space battle's great. Again, the barge scene at the beginning we've talked about. Drags a little bit in places there, and I think this is the only one of the 3 to really have trouble with some of its pacing in the center of the movie. But overall, I think it's a great cap to it. I think, we see movie series and there's other trilogies out there and there's TV shows, and one of the hardest things to do, and it's dropped so often, is the ending. Feeling that it's, emotionally satisfying and, gives us what we need out of the storyline. And Return of the Jedi does not fail us in giving us the emotional, relevant, proper ending to the trilogy. It holds up its end of the bargain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I, for the most part, agree. I'm not trying to say that the movie is just a rushed, messed up conclusion. It's still very strong. It wraps everything up nicely. And the strengths of the A storyline, like the Luke and Vader angle, the father-son dynamic is so strong. But there, as you said, I think there's still some pacing issues in the middle when they are on Endor until Luke leaves. Even though I like the speeder bike chase, I just think there's a little too much downtime. I think the land battle is a bit weak. Again, we talked about how the Rebels are. I think there was a missed opportunity there. But overall, it wraps everything up very nicely. It's still a very, very strong movie. Do you guys want to just go to a recommend now? So, Geoff, do you recommend Return of the Jedi? And how does it rank in comparison to the other two?
Yeah, I think legendary director Richard Marquand pulled the trilogy out of the fire, and I'll recommend this one.
Okay, how does it stand with the other?
You know what? I mean, I've always had my rankings over the years, and they've kind of changed places over the years for me. Having watched them last week in preparation for the podcast, honestly, it's a tie for first place, a 3-way tie for first. And I know that's a cop-out, but the hell with it. I'm going with it.
Nathan?
Yeah, I highly recommend this. And yeah, when I rank them, I go like Empire, Star Wars, Jedi, but you're talking about photo finish for all of them. So
yeah, for the most part, I agree. I can't say it's a tie. I think its drawbacks still rank it lower, but albeit slightly lower than the other two. For me, in terms of my favorites, Empire, Star Wars, and then this one, still a recommend. It's still a rare antiquity in terms of saying how do you wrap up and conclude a story, and it had such a strong A storyline that it's just so amazing how you don't see a lot of that happen in these days. And it's still a technical marvel to look at. It's still a beautiful watch. And its influence on pop culture. So that wraps up the movies themselves. I just wanted to ask you guys now, in terms of the pop culture today, obviously the influence of this trilogy is there. And it's going to transcend generations to generation. Do you guys want to talk or just give me your thoughts on how it has impacted pop culture? And Geoff, we talked about it briefly last time on the last podcast. You felt that aside from the high level good versus evil concept here, there wasn't really a lot of social commentary that George added here. In preparation for this podcast, do you still feel that way? Or, and Nathan, I'd like to get your input here as well. You guys go ahead. Geoff, you can start first.
Yeah, I don't find a lot of relevant social commentary here. I mean, this is largely a good versus evil storyline. I mean, there are other storylines that are fairly timeless. I mean, mostly it's about Luke Skywalker's journey. So it's a character story about Luke, and then the Galactic Civil War is the backdrop to Luke's spiritual journey, which is what this movie is about. So I don't think there's anything else from a political or social standpoint that's kind of there. And I think that, to the movie's credit, that helps age it. It's always going to be relevant because of that. As far as its influence on pop culture, I mean, shit, where do you want to start and where do you want to end? I mean, every person who's making films today is doing so, 90% of them are doing so because of Star Wars. So, sometimes it's just little bits in movies, and sometimes it's huge. So, man, I don't know where you can even start with the influence. I mean, it's so woven into everything now, from the music to lightsabers to the Death Star. I mean, there's things here that if you'd never seen, even if you hadn't seen Star Wars, and
you would know what that
surprised.
Is. Yeah.
You'd know what those things are, So,
I mean, everybody knows who Darth Vader is.
Yeah, everybody knows who Darth Vader is, and there's certain things that permeate culture absent of the films themselves, and that's pretty impressive because there aren't very many examples of that. There aren't really any other examples of that on this larger scale.
No, and I agree. This franchise is a thing of its own, especially when it comes to the original trilogy.
Well, as far as political messages, I agree with Geoff that it's really a story of good versus evil. I have heard people talk about, it's a analogy for the war in Vietnam. But that's years later, and then Lucas kind of picked up that thread. And was like, no, that's what I was going for, So, and as far as its influence on pop culture, I mean, oh man, a couple of weeks ago, or a month, maybe 2 months ago, I watched Masters of the Universe, a He-Man movie in the 80s, and it's strange. It's a He-Man movie, but it's actually a complete ripoff of Star Wars. I mean, they use a bunch of the special effects and everyone's dressed like Darth Vader. There's like a whole scene that's like the bounty hunter scene from Empire. It's ridiculous. And I don't know if you guys have seen Jupiter Ascending.
No,
but that movie,
thank God.
Oh man, that movie. Oh, it's terrible. It is directly influenced by Star Wars. It looks great, but yeah, it's ridiculous. And tons of movies. And also, this is a movie that is so popular around the world. It's probably one of the few movies that, you know, you can translate it into another language and it just still works, right? Whereas some other movies, even though they may be popular overseas, even when they're translated, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of pop culture references in those movies themselves that don't necessarily translate well, right? So, I mean, this is a movie that is popular across many cultures just because of its very basic nature.
No, I agree with pop culture. There's not really much I can add. I think you guys are a bit too, I wouldn't say harsh is not the right word. I'm surprised that you guys don't feel that Lucas has anything to talk about here in terms of relevance to politics or social commentary here, because the Vietnam War and those protests were his 9/11. Even though the movie was written and made after that time, I have a hard time believing that there's no elements of that in play. I mean, he himself said that Nixon was the emperor in his movies, and I went back and tried to find that quote, and he made that quote in 1981, so it wasn't like it was years after the original trilogy was released saying, oh yeah, I meant to do that. I mean, he even did that before Return of the Jedi came out. I think that at the time there's a lot of disapproval of the US government, and there were so many protests of what was going on at the Vietnam War. I felt there was no coincidence that Lucas would want to tell a story of these rebels overthrowing a dictatorship at the time. I mean, you're dealing with a superior military force invading a land. You're dealing with the Nixon Watergate scandal about a guy who wanted to overthrow the rules and make a third term for himself. So kind of like these concepts here were interwoven with his story about who the emperor was, who the empire was. And, you also get into the next level, and this is where the Ewoks come in. It's like they're obviously primitive race. They have no basis here of overthrowing the empire, but was Lucas trying to say, hey, the U.S. military invaded a land. We didn't win that war. These primitive natives who are not superior in terms of military forces beat us. You also go into the, technology versus nature. Luke didn't use technology to destroy the Death Star. He used faith. And the Empire didn't tolerate any ethnic or gender diversity. So these were some social movements that were happening in the 60s. And I think Lucas here was making a comment on who the Empire was. Was he making a comment on the U.S. government and the current political issues of the time? It's a stretch, but I think it's there. There's some layers there that I'm actually surprised that you guys are disagreeing with that.
Well, God damn it. Not everything's about Vietnam, man.
Yeah.
Well, no, it isn't. But I'm just saying that's his 9/11. It stayed with him.
I'm not saying he's not influenced by what's going on, but I don't think there's any commentary here on the Vietnam War. I mean, the Vietnam War was, was a proxy war. This is a civil war. Like, it's a very different type of conflict. So I don't see a lot of parallels there. What you're saying about Nixon and the emperor, and now that you mentioned that, I do recall having heard that. So I could see some of those elements there, but I think it's so far removed from those events, and without like some more, I just don't think it's there. I don't see it. I don't think that's not what these movies are about. I don't
think that's the focus of these movies. I'm just saying those layers are there. He's trying to add those relevant layers as part of his movie. That's all I'm saying.
No, he may have been trying to, but I don't think he succeeded if he was indeed trying to.
Well, any writer is going to be influenced by, current events at any given time. But I mean, I guess sometimes I feel I don't give Lucas a whole lot of credit when he talks about that sort of stuff, because I'm not always convinced that it's not someone suggesting it to him and then he just says, oh yeah, that's what I was going for. I remember there was a ton of this stuff going on. The political climate in the U.S. at the time, with Bush and Cheney and going to war right after 9/11, and because that's when the prequels came out, like all around that era, that was very, very heated politically. And people said, oh, look at all these analogies between the prequels and what's going on with the U.S. and Afghanistan, Iraq. And Lucas was like, yeah, no, that's what I was going for. I
think it's different. I agree with you. I think Lucas didn't really explain himself, and he just he took credit of one shot of again, we're getting into the prequel territory here, of the Jedi Temple kind of burning in the foreground there, and that's his 9/11 shot, his allegory to 9/11, and that's pretty much as close as he got to commenting on that. What I think that's in the Star Wars Original Trilogy, I think there's more depth, there's more layers there where I can see it. If you guys don't see it, that's fine. I think that's something that fans do like to talk about. I agree that that's not the focus. His focus is on...
It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's just, I mean, I guess you can just argue over where the source of it is, but I mean, no writer can't not be influenced by the world around them, right? So, of course, that'll seep into work.
Yeah, and then the reason why I wanted to kind of bring that up is, like, for my final thoughts, we can get into it here for the original trilogy, is I personally feel that Lucas, you can say he lost his way as a businessman, because he obviously did, as he created his own empire, the Lucasfilm empire. But before all that, he was just a brilliant filmmaker. And he was brilliant. He tapped into all the pre-existing myths, politics, religion, humanity, to create the modern fairy tale. And I don't think anybody has done that as effective since. I truly think he's a genius, and I think the original trilogy will stand the test of time. It is for everybody, every age group, and it's the trifecta. It is the trilogy to base any trilogy off of.
Well, to call back to Chasing Amy, that guy called it the Holy Trilogy, right? So it's really become that.
I agree. It's a shame because, George was most certainly a visionary director. He was a genius of a filmmaker. So whatever happened after that, I don't know. It's a shame because if there was more in that mind that we could know now, wouldn't that be a great place to live in? But unfortunately, a lot of it ends here. But that's okay because we get what we get here.
Oh, you also got Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah, of course,
Yeah,
and around the same time where he's still at the height of his powers.
Yeah,
he
just became the emperor.
He did. He did become the emperor.
He became the emperor. It's funny. He became what he always fought against, the studio system, and he became one of those people.
Well,
that he always hated.
Yeah, to his credit, though, he still, like a lot of those innovations, though, and where he started to turn to in his business dealings. Those are things that are felt still throughout Hollywood. Like, ILM still does lots of special effects. Everybody does their post-production at Skywalker Ranch. So there are other things that he created that still permeate past because of Star Wars that he got into. So, yeah, I mean, he lost his way creatively a little bit, probably thinking too much as a businessman. But he did innovate in a lot of other areas, too, because he was interested in, the technical innovation of filmmaking as well. They pioneered a lot of techniques in the original trilogy.
Yeah, and that became his focus, and then we can get into that next week. So
there's more. There's more for next week.
Yeah. Do you guys want to add any other thoughts to the Star Wars Original Trilogy, or you think we're done here? Covered it.
I don't know that I have anything else. We could talk for hours. Honestly,
we can't do justice. Because we all love these movies. Maybe the conversation is not as interesting because we're all gushing over most of the stuff presented here. I think more of the interesting conversation will happen next week. So, Geoff, first of all, Nathan, do you have anything else to add? Or
well, the only thing I want to add, but actually I'll want to talk about it more next time, is I watched these movies in the Machete order, and if anyone doesn't know what that is, you watch it in 4, 5, 2, 3, 6. And I'll talk more about that next time because I think it's more relevant to the prequels, but it's a very interesting way to watch these movies. It gets a bit of a different perspective.
But always thinking is, should that be the way I show my kids?
No. Later on, but not a first time showing.
Okay. So, Geoff, do you want to, it's quite obvious, we've already kind of hinted at it. So what are we doing next?
Yeah, as we've alluded to, we will dig into the prequel trilogy. I'm sure that it's going to be a very different type of conversation next week. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Epic throwdown.
Yeah, it'll be an epic throwdown for sure. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Okay, guys. Well, I appreciate it. That wraps things up for today. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Geoff. Thank you, Nathan, very much. And thank you, Andrew, you son of a bitch, for leaving us early. But we thank you nevertheless. Until next time, guys.
All right. We'll see you next time.
The Force will be with you. Always.